Okay. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm going to just go through the slides very quickly. It's just an introduction, but you're recording this and you can have the slides if you want. The START assessment is stands for Specialty Training Assessment of Readiness for Tenure. Tenure being a term that's very American, but I think we were looking for something that would read and sound great, and couldn't quite say stuck with consultancy for C instead of T. And it's basically an assessment of a trainee's readiness to be a consultant, and that's sort of the benchmark. So it came into being in 2013 after being piloted, and it's now mandatory before the end of training. It can be done at any time during level 3 training, but we do think it's better to do it in the latter half of ST7 because it gives you've done a little bit of a senior level training, but it gives you a bit of time to focus on any areas or aspects of especially higher level skills that you might want to develop before becoming a consultant. So we would say the latter half of ST7 and no later than the first half of ST8, so that you have at least 6 months of training time left to work on any areas that flagged up for development in the assessment. So it's held twice a year, in April and October, and we have had occasion to have ad hoc extra days. There's been a great demand for START assessment, and this actually predated COVID. Before we had the cancellations, we had reports all across the country of trainees that were waiting ages to get their START assessment in, and there were discussions as to whether to have more than two, hold it more than twice a year, and that the demand now is pent up because of COVID, of course. The next START assessment is on the 6th, 8th and 9th of October. And because of the pandemic, it will be virtual. There was a session that took place this month because there were about 22 trainees across the country, 3 in London, who had not been able to take START prior to their CCT date, which was this summer. And so, although it's a developmental assessment and not an exit exam or assessment, it's mandatory before you CCT, and so those trainees could not CCT, and the GMC were clear that they would not change the guidelines and the requirements for CCT. So an ad hoc assessment took place a few weeks ago, and it was used as a bit of a pilot going forward for the one in October. So forget that. This is not perhaps the status quo now, because this is based on the usual START assessment, which, as I'll tell you in my next slide, it has changed slightly with the virtual START assessment. So usually they are 12 stations and last 188 minutes with the timing on the slide, but that will be different, and the format is as yet undecided. So for the START assessment in October, what is planned are 10 stations rather than 12. Again, the exact format is not clear, but what Stephen could tell me from the college is that 6 of them will be generic, based on the higher level level training curriculum, progress curriculum, and 4 will be subspecialty based. So if you're a community or grid trainees, not just, I don't know why we put community there, grid trainees or general pediatric trainees. And so there will be 10 scenarios, and they will be taken from these topics. 8 of them are generic, so handover, critical appraisal, safe prescribing discussion, safeguarding discussion, a discussion around ethics, teaching, logistics and organizational skills, conflict and risk management. And then there will be 4 specialty specific scenario-based discussions. depending on whether the trainee is a general pediatric trainee or a Greek trainee. So it's a developmental assessment. So it's not a summative assessment, it's formative. And what is really important is not so much the performance of the trainee, but what developmental comments they get back in each station. So there's quite detailed feedback in each station from the two assessors. And you will get, or the trainee will get the report about 6 weeks after the assessment. Some of these slides were drawn up by Dr. Kingdon, who's our previous head of school, we know. She says it'll find its way into e-portfolio, and it does. I don't think that you get any notice that it's coming, and then just one day you'll get an email and it'll be in your e-portfolio. And when that happens, what we want is for the trainee and educational supervisor to sit down, go through the report and discuss any areas for, well, just discuss the assessment, you know, the strong points that were, strong positive points that were raised, and then any developmental areas, and then develop an action plan in response to the feedback. So it's not a summative assessment. You don't pass your START assessment or fail it, but you may need to, it may show up gaps that you need to try and close prior to CCT. The feedback comes in, there's a lot of narrative, but really what you want is for the trainee to meet competence, or where the areas needed to achieve those competencies, that the assessors give some kind of hints as to how that trainee can work to meet that competence. And very rarely, but we have had this, there's significant concerns that are raised. So perhaps the way the trainee spoke, usually it's communication stations, sometimes prescribing, where the assessors think that if this was a real life situation, this will be a serious concern and might be a kind of patient safety concern. That would be raised, and that has to be dealt with in the context of patient safety. So that's quite unusual, but can and does happen. So this is what the report will look like, or what it usually looks like. I have no idea what the abbreviated START report would look like. And so with Joe Bluggs in this report, met competence for most of the assessments and above competence for quite a few as well. In fact, above competence for quite a significant number, and then 2 areas needed to develop competence. And it's worth me saying this, that actually the critical appraisal station and the safe prescribing stations are areas that I think when we do look through trainees' e-portfolios, it's generally where people have to work on achieving competence. So it's just worth bearing that in mind, especially the critical appraisal station, because it's not something I think that necessarily we do on a day-to-day basis. And it's just worth, as you're thinking about preparing for your consultancy role, just realizing that you will need to be doing this. You'll need to be looking at papers and journals and deciding whether that paper or that article is actually relevant to your patient group, and is it a good paper in the first place. So it is useful to think about. So this is how it will come, your report. It will, there will be a lot of narrative, and actually this one isn't a very good example, because more recently it's very personal and very very individualized, even more than it shows here. So you know that actually they were listening to you and they're engaging you, and they will tell you what they thought about your responses. So if I go to the previous one, and I can't do that now, how do I do that? How do I go back? I want to go back. No, sorry. I'm trying to go back to, yeah, that's the one I want to. So we do want trainees to focus on the START assessment, irrespective of whether you have areas to remediate or not, whether you've got any needs, development needed to meet competence, because it's quite an important assessment. And I think it can be used to show your strengths. And so every trainee should reflect on their START assessment. So I've changed it from START remediation to say START reflection and remediation. So it's quite important that you do that. You don't necessarily have to share it on your e-portfolio if you don't have any areas for remediation, but do reflect on it. Do it in an objective way and discuss it clearly with your educational supervisor. Because even when you meet competence, there might be areas that you might want to still work on, or you might be an area of strength that you thought was, an area that you thought was your strength, and actually maybe you're not as strong when it comes to practice, that you might want to work on one or two things. So it's important to reflect on the whole assessment. But we need to see evidence of remediation if you have, if the assessment shows that there are areas that you need to remediate on, and that is absolutely essential. It's not a pass or fail assessment, but we need to show that you are working or have worked to close any developmental gaps that were picked up. So it's important, first of all, that your education supervisor trainer's report indicates that discussion has taken place, and there is a tab on the ES trainer's report now that says, has the trainee taken START? Yes. Have you discussed any areas of remediation? Have you discussed the assessment? Yes, no. And then we want the trainees, and this is incredibly important, to create a folder in the e-portfolio that's then entitled START Reflection and Remediation. We don't want to have to look for it. So a lot of the times, say for instance, if it's station 1 and critical appraisal, and the trainee needed to do some development to meet competence, and then they've done a journal club and done some discussion with their ES, and they've put it in their developmental log, but we don't know. And so we have to kind of start going through all and trying to work out whether this is the remediation for that station. And we don't want to do that. What we want is for you to point it out as a trainee in your e-portfolio, and then upload the evidence relating to the remediation or reflection. And without this, an outcome 6 will not be issued. And even when we overlook this, the GMC bounces it back. And I was quite surprised last year. We had 2 cases that came back. I did not really expect the GMC to be looking that closely at e-portfolios, but they do. Now, how you do it, how you put the information on is individualized. Different trainees do it differently, but this is a good one where you do a table, a Word document, put in the learning need, what station it was, what the discussion was. So it might say, you didn't, I don't know, your communication with this parent wasn't great, maybe conflict resolution, attend a conflict resolution course or something like that. And then we want to know how you address this, and we want the evidence, and obviously that you have achieved that you've actually now fully remediated. So this is a good way of doing it, having a kind of tabulated word-based document that tells us. But even if you don't, I wasn't able to complete this. I was trying to find one recently. It was a trainee that I asked her if I could use her START reflection, and she said yes. But unfortunately, I completely forgot her name, and under duress today, I couldn't remember. But it was quite nice what she did. She sort of went through all the stations and just sort of had her own reflection on her performance. So she had, she wrote down what was said, or what the assessor said, how she reflected on what they said and her performance, and whether she thought it brought up any developmental needs, and what she was going to do following that. So really, that's it. That START is a developmental assessment. It's formulated to aid progression to a senior clinical role. We think if you engage with the process, you can make it work for you. It's certainly not a tick box exercise and should not be viewed as such. And I think that's it, really. I'm happy to take questions, if there are any.
Any questions from anyone?
How do I stop sharing now? Stop share, there we go. Okay. Good, well, no questions. I think it was clear. It was just really, it's more about, you know, how you prepare for it. But I don't think you necessarily need to prepare for it. You just need to be, I think you should engage with it.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't realize I could unmute myself. I've heard from my local trainee rep, I'm not a London trainee, that in this diet, there won't be the prescription station or the critical appraisal station because of the time factor. Is there any way to confirm that? Because it's going to obviously affect how we use the time that we have left to prepare.
So we just say that question again very quickly. What stations did you hear will not be?
Critical appraisal and prescription.
No, I've just had an email I had an email this yesterday from the training from the college, and there will be 10 scenarios taken from the 12 topics, 4 of which are clinical, and the 8 stations: handover, ethics, critical appraisal, safe prescribing, teaching, conflict and risk management, logistics, and safeguarding.
Okay, great, thank you.
There's just a few questions in the chat. So one person said, just curious as to how critical appraisal might work here, but I think we've answered.
Yeah, I don't think, like I said, he said, I can read exactly what the college, what the training service, the training lead from the college said yesterday. October is virtual, March is planned as face-to-face. The assessment is likely to be more generic in approach, in line with the level 3 RCVH's progress generic curriculum. The specific design of the 10 scenario circuit is still being designed. So I don't think they know exactly what they're going to do. I can find out, I can tell you what the 6 stations that were done earlier on this month were, because, so that came in, what day? That was Monday, wasn't it? If I can find the email, I can't find it. Was that Monday or was that Tuesday? That was Monday. Oh, sorry, that's because I'm going Mondays this week, sorry. Wrong. Here we go. Okay, I'm just going to go to one of the START reports. So safe prescribing, they had to adjust a trainee's incorrect prescription. And as well as identifying the incorrect prescription, the main focus of the scenario was how you go about managing the events that occurred following on from it. So I presume they gave the scenario and gave a little bit of time. And then there was a safeguarding one, and logistics, handover, ethics, conflict. So there was no critical appraisal, but that was just a 6 station. And that was really, it was an ad hoc one. They just really wanted to focus on perhaps the most important aspects so they could get these 22 trainees through to CCT. Yeah. So I have no idea how it would work. It's quite interesting because we've got exams coming up as well, and it'll be interesting to see how we do clinical exams in a virtual format.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Anne, for your input. And I think we've got coming up next. There's no more questions from anyone.
Thank you. I'm going back to my ward.
Okay, thanks for making the time for this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So next is Dr. Parish. She will be giving her perspective from a trainee's point of view, having recently done it herself. And we're actually running a bit early, Emma, but if you are happy to start, that would be great.
Yeah, if you're happy for me to. Can you see my screen and hear me okay?
Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah.
Perfect. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to come and talk with you about this tonight. As I said, I've done the start fairly recently, so I can share with you that I've not done it in the virtual format, which is what you are preparing for. But hopefully, if you have some questions, we can have a chat about it, because I think that's probably what, if reflecting back on when I was preparing for this assessment, if somebody suddenly said it was going to be in a different format, you feel a little bit more at sea, and it's probably where some of the anxiety is going to come from this session. But what I would say is think about it like you would be preparing for a virtual interview. So a lot of your colleagues, if they've not done START before, may over the last few months have done some virtual interviews for consultant or for fellowship roles. And I would really suggest asking people and kind of finding out some of the hints and tips that they gave. So some of the things to share are just to think about it like a conversation, like a professional interview, and maybe prepare for it in that way. So get yourself set up in plenty time, and have what you need around you for if you're someone who wants to scribble whilst you think. So these are my hints and tips. I'm happy to take questions at the end or throughout, whatever you would like, but I've basically covered in the presentation, which I'm happy to share the slides, some general points, some preparation hints and tips, a bit about feedback, which Anne also covered really well. I've got a few slides which are basically useful resources, and I normally steer away from having lots of slides with lots of things on it, and I prefer to go for pictures, but I think for this purpose it's probably helpful for you to know some of the key documents to get to grips with ahead of having these conversations. Some of the buzzwords and some specific examples, and then a little bit about take-home messages and hopefully some of your questions. So the general points that people tend to ask about START, in my experience, is how does it feel? Is it really an assessment or is it an exam? And I think the people who put this together originally took a lot of effort and care to make it an assessment and not a pass-fail thing. So how it really felt doing it was more of a professional discussion. So it felt like you were talking to somebody and making plans with them. So it wasn't so much like the role play of an OSCE situation, but much more a kind of discussion around what you're planning to do based on the scenario that you're given. And you have that little bit of time before to prepare for that. So although we're not sure exactly the format, I suspect you will have some preparation time and then be brought into a room, which is a virtual room, to have that discussion with somebody. Or whether you follow with somebody all the way through, that's something I'm not clear on yet. Do you need to know everything? So people ask me this all the time, where do I start? It's really hard to know everything. What I would say is that it really did feel like you were being assessed at the level of being a newly appointed consultant. So are you able to take that step from being the registrar who sees every patient and who knows what's going on the ward and is fully immersed, to having a kind of more of a step back view of how you might run things and what you would do and what you'd be like as a colleague? Can you fail it? No, you can only get recommendations. It can be a mixed bag of what feedback you get, and people are often worried about having enough time to remediate. What I would say is the preparation for this assessment is really your day-to-day work, with a bit of extra reading and being a bit more you on your absolute best day. But you can only get recommendations, and that remediation you can definitely address through your day-to-day interactions at work and reflecting on those, as well as some pointed things that you might want to get time to do before you CCT. Is the time enough? I would say sometimes the time is really short, but you talk through what you can. This was more about when it was in person. Do you take and carry notes? You can take anything that's been given to you into the station. So I think virtually it'll be interesting to see whether they leave the scenario up for you or how they're going to run that, and hopefully you'll get talked through that at the start of the assessment. Water and snacks, I think that remains the same. If it's something that you think you're going to need in the time that you're being given, or if the stations are being shortened, probably not snacks on a virtual discussion, but if you need a drink of water, definitely have it to hand. And it never hurts to be prepared and know the stations. So Anne's gone through what those are this time round expected to be. Generally, I would say a good approach is to say, hello, my name is Emma, I'm a paediatric trainee in that instance, but a consultant now, and just introduce yourself and give yourself that minute of what you know you can say. Then the approach that I took was generally thinking about the problems that were in front of me as how do they affect people as individuals, how are they affecting the team, patient and the family, and how is it impacting on the system. And I used that as a way of thinking about what was being asked of the question, and we can come to that if there are questions about that approach. And then when are you going to call for help? That's what the phone represents. So my general approach was to start the discussion by saying who I was, then talk through the issue, and then make it clear what I would want to get some further support and help with. And I think, having been a consultant for a few months now, that's still my approach to most problems as they come up. So I think it's a fair assessment of what might be expected for you. Preparation, I think people are always worried that we don't have enough time. Whatever you have to dedicate to this is enough. The idea is that this is assessing you on your current level of performance, and that you will have a little bit of time to get yourself up to speed if there are areas that you need remediation for or reflection on. How deep do you go in the preparation? I think that really depends on your starting point. So for me, I have real interest in safeguarding, and it would have been lovely to spend all my time reading really interesting stuff around safeguarding, but really I probably had enough knowledge that I could keep that to one side for the purposes of the START assessment and focus more on the things where I knew maybe I wasn't so strong on. So I think try and be really strict with yourself, not to purely do the things that bring you joy, but to do some of the things that make you grow a little bit as well. Focus on topics that are likely to come up. So, really think about what kind of topics, what kind of scenarios might come up, and ask people who've done the session before. Ask your newly appointed consultant colleagues, and just really be curious in the next few weeks as you're preparing for this. Ask people in real scenarios, not just what did they get in START, but how would they approach getting a complaint? How would they think about getting funding for something? What would be their approach to thinking about a complex ethical situation? Who do they involve in a multi-team discussion about children that have got complex needs or from community and needing support in the hospital? So ask and be curious, and you'll probably pick up enough from some of those conversations that you would be able to think about how you might respond in that situation. There are groups and support there. Obviously, at London School of Paediatrics, we're really fortunate that we've got a really active education group for the London School of Paediatrics, and they do evenings like this. But there's also Trello. Find somebody in your hospital or in your network that has either done it recently or is doing it, and study together. Just video yourself. We're in this kind of weird time where you're on screen all the time. So if it's something that makes you nervous, just start practicing. And although that is incredibly painful and not something I enjoy very much, it is really helpful to know what your habits are. And I would say really make work for you. Whatever you're in at the moment, whether you're in a really heavy clinic-based specialty of paediatrics, whether you're in the wards, whether you're in A&E, whether you're in neonates, just use every day from today to think, okay, what were the challenging situations that I faced or that I saw my consultant colleague face? Have a bit of a think about it. The bonus is if you start doing that, you can reflect on it in your e-portfolio, and you might even get some workplace-based assessments out of it. I know that we're not in ARCP season for a lot of people, but you might find that you get a double bonus out of approaching it that way. And you probably then don't need to do so much reading and extra work in the evening around these things, because you need your time for downtime as well. I would say one of the things that I did in preparation for START, which was super helpful, was to take some opportunities to act up. So asking if you can step into the consultant role for a day, asking to shadow the consultant, understanding how they manage their inbox or how they deal with vetting is particularly helpful. And then it came up actually in one of the stations that we had for the cohort that I did. And attending that departmental meeting. At the moment, a lot of stuff's moved to virtual, and you might find that actually you can pop into that meeting in a way that would have been harder in the past. So do ask for those opportunities and take them. And if you're not being given them where you are, reach out to some people within the school and they can help as well. These are the stations commonly. I know that you're going to have slightly reduced number of stations, I think, in the virtual version of this. But these are basically the same as what Anne was talking to you about. And I'll pick out a few in particular to talk you through, but I have included slides with some resources that you might find helpful for each of these. Just very briefly on the feedback, not to cover the same ground that Anne already covered. Something that I tend to do for any assessment or exams, or if I'm supervising a trainee that's going through exams or assessments, is to see whether you can get access to the marking schedule or the feedback form that's used by the examiners. And the RCPCH are actually really open and transparent about this. So this is from their website in the START section. Some of you may have looked at it already, but if you haven't, it's there. And actually you can see how you're going to be marked. Now, obviously, virtually, they might have some different criteria and they might have some different discussion, but this is essentially what they're looking for every station. People will be looking and grading as to whether further development performs at expected standard or well above the expected standard. And that's the feedback that you then get. And they'll put some detailed discussion at the bottom. And then, as Anne said, make a folder on Kaizen ahead of time. Look at the feedback and reflect on the learning points and really say what you've done. And what I would suggest from experience is to think about booking a time with your supervisor to really discuss your START assessment results. So we didn't get notice, as Anne said, that they were coming in, but we knew it was going to be roughly 6 to 8 weeks after the assessment. So start talking to your supervisor about the fact that you're doing START now and that in a couple of months' time, so for those doing it in October, maybe around December, you might want to have a consultation with them and a discussion, or informally or formally, about your results in the first instance, just so you can be looking at that with the support of somebody. Because what you really want to do is then make use of the time after that, between when you get the feedback and when you need to be thinking about your CCT, to really target in on the stuff you want to dig into in a bit more detail and reflect on that. So that would be just something I would recommend. I've not given you all my results, but this is basically what you get back, which Anne's already shown you, and you can see that there are dots where you need further development. There's a single tick if you're meeting expectations and a double tick if you've performed above expectations. The point of showing you this is just to show that you can get a dot that says that you need development in one area of a skill, but it doesn't mean that the overall result for that station necessarily drops down. But what I would recommend is wherever you have a dot as a minimum, reflect on that. And if the whole station is all dots, then reflect on the whole station. So what I got was some feedback around this knowledge section of section 2. That unsurprisingly, I think Anne mentioned the prescribing station was a hard one. And it's one that people struggle with. So I got a bit of personalised feedback on how I couldn't prescribe Adazolam, and then really thought about it because it was a paper prescription. It was different to what we used. There was a little complication around it that they always put in around thinking about weight and the child not fitting the age and the weight criteria. So just thinking about medicines that might have that as an issue. So then I made this folder on my Kaizen and then did a reflective piece. So as well as the grid that Anne showed that some people would do, this was how I approached it. So I wrote the assessor's comment. This was for another area that I needed to remediate on, and then did my reflection, said what I'd done that in response to that feedback, this was around trainees in difficulty, put in some things that I'd read, and then linked that on my e-portfolio. So it's not, there's only, you know, this is me just showing you one way of doing it. There are lots of ways you can do it. Grid probably makes a lot of sense. So just ask people how they've done their reflection. But I think the important thing is make it easy for someone who's then looking at your e-portfolio, who can see the reflections that you've written and can see that you took the assessment seriously, because really these are things that you want to be able to feel comfortable with as a new consultant in those first few weeks and months. So it is helpful to get yourself up to speed, and that's something that I think is really good about this assessment, is that any further reading is actually useful for you in your next steps. So on that, I've put in some of the useful resources. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are things that are places that are good to look generally. For safeguarding children, you've got a whole session on that coming up. I would say take-home message on safeguarding is know how to escalate and who to escalate to. Be really smart about thinking about red flags. You've got a short time. The type of scenario is going to be more complex than maybe you would have gotten for your MRCPCH discussions, because they're expecting you to be a newly appointed consultant, but that doesn't mean that the basic principles are not the same. For ethics, you've got a session later on that as well. I think it's really, really reasonable to expect that you'll understand some of the things that are specific to ethics and paediatrics. So consent for different age groups, your Gillick and Fraser competence and guidelines and being able to explain what those are, duty of care versus confidentiality. The default for these kind of ethical questions that I would recommend are basically think about best practice. Do things that are safe, that you would do in the normal working pattern that you do at work, and think about how you would explain that to a colleague. And this document, the 0 to 18 guidance for all documents, is pretty short and is a good one just to refresh and remind yourself of some of the GMC principles, because you never know what might pop into your head and you can pull from that document. These are some examples that have been in previous START assessments. I don't think we're breaching any confidentiality by sharing them. They're things that people have remembered being discussed or reflected on. So they're kind of typical 14-year-old girl comes in as an inpatient, talks to you in confident, doesn't want to go ahead with the treatment. The kind of details around the case are obviously important on an individual patient basis, but for you as preparing for these kind of stations, what you really want to think about is, what am I being asked? What is the ethical dilemma? How would I approach it? And just talk it through with a colleague. That's what you're doing in the assessment. There are another one there that was from one of the neonatal grids, and then one that was from a recent one about consent, about who's got parental responsibility, basically a boyfriend of a girl brought her to A&E, they've been managed, they're moving to PICU, he's understandably worried, but can you update him on her clinical state? So those are just some of the examples to start thinking about. The other important thing to remember, and I think quite a few people that I've spoken to have had scenarios where this has come up, is around the duty of candour, which is not as new as it once was, and I think most of us are aware of doing that within our daily practice as well. So these are not things that people are unfamiliar with, it's just remembering to put the right labels onto what's being asked of you. One thing that I think trips people up a little bit is about thinking bigger picture, because you're working so hard clinically that just having that little step back, perhaps the current redeployment situations and things around COVID that everybody's been coping with, I think maybe people have been slightly more upskilled in understanding logistics and organisation and how rotas work and how safe staffing works and things like that. So these are just a couple of resources that you could spend some time looking at if this is an area that really worries you or gets you slightly anxious. I don't think people would expect you to be able to explain in the entirety of the NHS. That's not really what they're looking for, but knowing a little bit about how the NHS works. And this King's Fund video, although it's a few years old now, is still really excellent at giving that kind of overview for NHS England. There's a similar one on the website for Scotland and Wales, and I think recently for Northern Ireland as well. One thing that has come up in the past that makes everyone nervous and probably still panics a lot of consultants now is about writing things like a business case. This is a useful resource which tells you a little bit more about how to do that, and a recent example of a business case, just so that you've seen it and you know kind of what it includes. One example that a colleague of mine had was about they were told that the autism waiting list for assessment was now 12 months. The CCG are considering centralising the speech and language therapy service with acute paediatrics, and that means you're going to miss out on some appointments. So how would you put together a case for keeping community speech and language therapy? So I think it's just about knowing some of the processes that you would go through, and Jane Runnacles is doing a talk later about quality improvement, and some of those principles are really useful when you're answering these kind of questions in a discussion, thinking about what are you aiming to do, what's the measure of knowing what the outcome's going to be, and what might be some of the ideas or interventions you might try to see if you can make an improvement. So do listen up for that in Jane's talk, but think about some of these bigger picture stuff that you don't really get the time to. No, one of the stations that I had was talking about standards, and I think it's worth knowing what you're being benchmarked against and knowing some of the standards that we have in the NHS and how it's governed. So speak to your team about how they manage complaints, what they do about M&M, so morbidity and mortality data, and how they act on that, and then think a little bit higher level to the system around, you know, what's happening. Is there a recent CQC document that you can read about where you work or something? You know, make it useful for you, not just something that you have to add onto a reading list, which is like 90 documents long. Make it something that actually might be helpful for you within the department you're working at. And knowing how to navigate those kind of documents is really helpful actually for next steps. So if you're doing interviews for somewhere or you're thinking about working somewhere, you know, it's really helpful to know what kind of documents you want to read about that place, so you can see whether it's, you know, going in the direction that you can help with, and what you might be able to support your colleagues to do and what they're aiming for. There are obviously some important reviews that have come out. There's the NHS long-term plan, there's the recent RCPCH have done the 2040 vision. So, you know, there are documents that are out and about, and just having a handle on some of those and making your discussion with the other person quite interesting, I think, is always a good thing to try and do. So you don't need to keep up to date with, you know, everything from when the NHS was formed to now, but just think about some of the really highlights and key points of NHS, as well as some of our real deep learning and troublesome reports that have come out. So things like the Mid Staffordshire Trust, long-term plans, those things we can talk about in the questions if they come up. These are a few other useful resources, and some conflict management stuff that comes up a lot. How would you manage a trainee who's maybe either in difficulty professionally or personally? How would you manage someone who's your peer, who's a fellow consultant? How would you manage if it was someone within your team who was very senior? So that comes up not just in START assessment, but it comes up a lot in interviews, and it comes up a lot in real life when you need to know how you're going to manage these things. We're nice in paediatrics, but we're not always able to just mitigate for everything. So, you know, there's conflict and risk management happening all the time. So really think about that. And one of the things that I would suggest for any station, because sometimes you get that station that just panics you or floors you, or your lull of concentration has gone, is just think back. What am I being asked? What do I know about this situation? Or what do I know about this issue that's being asked about? For example, if it's safeguarding, what don't I know and would need to find out? And basically that's the conversation you're having with the person who's assessing you. You're saying to them, look, this is what I understand is being asked of me. This is what I know. This is what I would do. This is what I've seen work in practice that I might adopt. But this is what I don't know, and these are the people that I would go and ask for it. So you know, if it's safeguarding, you know, I'd go to a named doctor, I'd go to the head of my safeguarding specialty with the nurse specialist, I speak to social work. You're not a one-person band when you practice, and I think that's what's nice about the assessment, is the recognition that you are part of a team, and how do you use that team. Critical appraisal worries everybody. I really like reading papers, but I still find it quite nerve-wracking to tell someone what I think about a paper in a very short time. We can chat about it in more detail. You've got a whole session coming up just after mine. This is basically how I approach it, the PICO approach, which is patient population intervention comparison and outcome. It's a really simple mnemonic that I use when I read through papers, and we can talk about that in more detail, but I'm sure you're going to hear a little bit more. Put that pile of shame of articles to good use. A really good tip that I got for life basically is, you know, to read the BMJ or archives like you would any other magazine. So you don't read every page front to back of a magazine. Well, I certainly don't. So why would you do the same with that? Pick the things that pique your interest, really read those, really try and understand those. And then anything else you read around that is a bit of a bonus. So I guess everything is online now, so you can do the same. Read the things that come up on the homepage that are of interest to you, and then critically appraise those, and get your colleagues to do it with you, because it's much more fun to do these things together, and you might figure things out together. The Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine, which is the resource that I've got at the bottom of the screen there, have got worksheets for every type of study. So looking at this pyramid of research, they have a way of appraising each one. So if you're really interested in this, or if it's something that you genuinely want to develop, then I would recommend having a look at that. Prescribing was my area of remediation probably that I needed to do the most in before qualifying. Although I felt I was a safe prescriber, there was definitely things about it that were flagged from the assessment. So just having a chat to the pharmacist ahead of doing this START assessment would have been majorly useful. You know, they know what people make regular errors in, and that's probably likely to be something that will come up in assessments. Just think about the types of things you might be being asked to do. It's not going to be just, you know, prescribe paracetamol, but it's going to be thinking about what might be some of the complications around the prescription. And even although I found that station the hardest, and I had to do a bit more reflection on it, overall, because I was able to talk about things in a safe way and didn't do anything that was an unsafe drug error, for example, the station was still okay and still met expectations. But this was one where I would think, for me, I should have focused a bit more in on. So do think about whether you feel comfortable with that. The teaching one is really interesting. It was really short, so just, you know, you could be the best teacher ever, but you are going to have a really short time. So it's important that you think about how you interact with the person you're going to be asked to teach. That you need to give them information that's factually correct. You need to give them some take-home messages, and really you're only going to manage about 3. The session that I did, we were given a choice of 3 topics and we had to choose one. So I know that, you know, I don't know how they'll run it from the virtual point of view, but essentially you just picked the one where you thought I can do something in that. And a basic structure is give an introduction, check their understanding at the beginning, ask a little bit about what do they know around the topic already, have a structure to what you're going to do, you know, the SMART objectives, what's the aim at the end of the session. If it's on fluid prescription, you want them to understand that fluids are prescribed at different rates for different weights, you know. So if that's your take-home message, don't overcomplicate it. And remember to give yourself that little bit of time to just close the session and signpost other resources that they can use. Suggest it could be a workplace-based assessment. Just have a way of closing the session that shows somebody that if you were on the ward and you only had that amount of time to teach somebody, you're able to adapt and teach in that kind of short time. There are obviously buzzwords, and this comes up all the time. People say, I don't really know what that's called. I don't know whether to use it, it feels uncomfortable. This is a professional conversation. Use the language that you're comfortable with. Use phrases that you know you can explain. It's the same as what you would do with a patient. You wouldn't go into something using abbreviations that they might need you to expand on and not know what they mean yourself. So just, you know most of this. You're doing it every day as a senior registrar. So what you're doing is really polishing up the edges so that on the assessment, you're you on your best day. And that's what you really want to feel like you've given it a good shot. But what you're actually doing is you're benchmarking yourself and you're saying, well, if I was to be the consultant tomorrow, how ready am I for that challenge? So I think really important to take the feedback as genuinely there to help you. On that note, I would just say that we have got the RCPCH Stepping Up Network, which I'm part of as one of the Stepping Up champions. We help and support and do some sessions on lots of these topics. We've got a few planned before October, which probably would help a little bit with some preparation around some of the logistics and things, which I'm very happy for anyone who wants to. If you email the steppinguplondon@gmail.com, or if you're outside of London and listening in, then you will have a champion for your own network that you can get on RCPCH. So do get in touch and don't be out on a limb on your own worrying about this. There are people who can help and support you and make you see what you already know and help you with some of the stuff maybe you need to brush up on. So just, again, seeing as it's a teaching session, I guess, is just to go back and to say, just approach it. Try and relax into it. Introduce yourself. Have a bit of an approach for how you're going to go through the stations. This was mine. And then let them know that you're going to call for support when you need it. That is what everybody wants from the colleague that they're going to be working with, that you practice safely, that you bring your knowledge, you show up to the best of your ability, but then you actually know when to say, I'm going to need a bit more help with this, and how am I going to get that help? That's really what I would recommend. This is a quote that I like, you can't let your failures define you, you have to let your failures teach you. And I think that's really what the START assessment is there to do. So I don't think it's a bad quote to live by. And good luck. I'm happy to take any questions or to go through things if anyone would like.
Great, thank you so much, Emma. Does anyone want to pose any questions? We have about 5 minutes before the next speaker. That was very comprehensive.
Hi, sorry, my name is Sasha. Apologies, you can't see my video. I'm having some technical difficulties, so I can't do audio and video simultaneously. But Emma, I just wanted to ask you a quick question. Did you find that timing was quite difficult in terms of trying to get all your thoughts across and how you would actually approach particular stations? And do you have a way of actually trying to possibly work around that?
Yeah.
Any suggestions? Yeah.
Yeah, so the timing is tight. There's actually more time to discuss than you think. And usually in the sessions that you are dreading, they seem to last a lot longer, right? The ones where you know what you want to say, you suddenly run out of time. What I would say is really just, I did the rule of threes. For anything that I was asked to do, I thought, what are my top 3 priorities for this station? What do I want to make sure that I've addressed and told them about? So for example, with the station we had on handover, it's quite long, the handover that we got to look through. You know, there's a lot of patients on there, and you only had the 4-minute preparation to decide. So I thought, well, one, I want to be safe. So I'm going to make sure that I'm safe. So they need to be seen. The second one for the handover was, what are the opportunities for someone in the team to do something as a learning opportunity? And then 3 was for that one was about, is there anything that's potentially going to take a longer time that I need to come back to later? So there was like obviously a safeguarding case that you felt, well, I can't rush through that. So basically, I think in that time scale, knowing what the top 3 things you want to talk about with the person in the room is probably my tip. but different things work for different
Yeah.
people, and that's why I did it for each station.
Okay. Right. I think, you know, the difficulties, it's just what you would do in real life, in a real day-to-day thing. And I think at the end of the day, it's being able to kind of sell your competencies within a fixed time period, which is, I think, you know, that's the thing that's kind of trying to get my head around, you know. Yeah.
A lot of that will come from exactly as you've discussed now, is that in the room you have the opportunity to say, if I were running the ward, obviously I would take a bit longer to have a look through the list, and I would be coming in slightly earlier if I was the consultant attending, to make sure that I knew what the issues were going to be. So there's a little bit about it where it's not like you're doing a performance, you're actually having a conversation like we are now and saying, these are what I noticed in the 4 minutes I've had, but if I could choose how to run the ward, this is how I would run it.
Okay. No, thanks so much. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think Toyin had their hand up.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, that was from the last speaker. Sorry about that.
Oh, really? Okay, no worries, no worries. There's actually a few other questions on the chat. I'm not sure if we'll get through all of them. One from Rashmi: what kind of preparation would you recommend for safeguarding? I think we'll probably go into safeguarding a bit.
Session on safeguarding, so I think that will be covered.
We'll skip that. And then there's another one that says, where do you log your reflections on Kaizen? Under which section?
So I would, where you can go into Kaizen, and there's a section for creating folders, which is within, I don't remember what bar across it is, but there's a section where you can upload documents. So that's where you create your folder, you upload a document into it. So I uploaded my feedback, I uploaded each reflection piece that I'd written, or I guess if you were going to do it as a grid, you'd upload the grid document into that folder, and then you can tag the folder to different workplace-based assessments or things that relate to it. So it's there. It's the same place where you put your ARCP folder every year, that section of Kaizen.
Yeah, great, awesome. And one other question: how do you approach a teaching station about a rare condition that you've not heard of?
Well, I think it's probably about being honest. Nobody wants to have the wrong information given. I think out of the 3 scenarios, you will probably find one where you feel comfortable. But if there were none of them and you chose something you didn't know about, my recommendation would be to do the same thing, which is to introduce yourself, figure out what things you want them to take away from the discussion. So one might be that you actually teach them that this is a really rare condition that I don't know about. Let's have a think about where we might learn some information together about this, and talk them through what you would want them to be aware of, or turn it towards communication and saying, you know, if this was a parent that came in and didn't know anything about the condition, what would I tell them? I suspect it's unlikely that you're going to get something where you know nothing about it. And remember that the teaching is that the expectation is you're teaching someone traditionally who's a medical student or a junior trainee. So you're imparting knowledge that you probably do hold. I hope that's reassuring, but I wouldn't blag it, but I would just be open about what you know, what you don't know, and maybe use it as an opportunity to say and do a bit of teaching around sort of rare conditions and how you might approach that with a family, and how you might support them in finding the right support groups and different things. That would be my approach.
Great, okay, thank you so much. If anyone needs to contact you later to ask a few more questions, what's the best?
I'll pop my email onto the chat, and people can send me emails, and I'll also put the Stepping Up group onto the chat, which I monitor those emails as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Good luck, everyone.
Thanks. And so now we have Harris, who's going to give us a little bit of a rundown on critical appraisal for START. This is a very important section, and we're very grateful to have you come and speak to us. Thanks, Harris.
Hi, thank you, Merit. Thank you guys for inviting me. Just to check, can people hear me and see me? Because I've had a few minor connection issues. I seem to have sorted them now, but just in case, I may need to turn my camera off as we go along. Let's see. I'm currently outside of London. I'm in a very hot place right now. Not that it matters, but my connection seems to be a bit unstable. So, hi everyone. I'm sure I know quite a few of you, but as I can't see you, I'm going to introduce myself. So I'm Harris, and I have, let me just share my screen. Oops, no. I'll figure it out. So I've recently CCT'd in Paediatrics and Pediatric Emergency Medicine grid. Can you see my screen now, guys?
Not yet.
No, not
There's a
yet.
button at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, hasn't been shared. Okay. Yeah, I think it's worked now. Okay. So, and I happen to also teach evidence-based medicine every now and then. I'm a tutor. I guess, and disclaimer, I don't have much experience of START because I've only taken the assessment once, as it happens with most people, and I don't have any inside information, but hopefully I will have a couple of things to tell you about critical appraisal. And I've been given the task today essentially to get you to feel calmer and more confident about this station, which is a very small task, right? So I think Dr. Oputa touched on this, but traditionally within the START assessment, the critical appraisal station is the one that most trainees don't feel very confident about. My anecdotal information says that it's a station that a lot of trainees need to also remediate on. So there must be some gaps perhaps in the way we are taught this area. There must be something about our training that makes us less confident in this area, because I personally don't think it's that difficult. And I'm gonna start off by getting you to do some work. So you can see, I'm sure you're all very intelligent people, and I'll give you half a minute to calculate all of this. And I'm sure many of you have been told when you've been on courses on presentation skills to not start your presentations by showing complicated data and graphs. And I think that's right. And the other thing to say is that all of this data is also made up. I just put some random numbers last night in an Excel spreadsheet to make this. But I guess my point, just before you all run away from the virtual room and I'm left on my own with Merit here, is that a lot of people expect critical appraisal to be all about data and statistics. And actually, I guess my aim for today is to just tell you to calm down, because it's more about using your critical thinking and less about knowing how to do stats. Particularly for the START assessment, okay? When we teach evidence-based medicine on a university level, obviously we do expect them to know statistics. For the START assessment, as you've heard, it's more about professional discussions, and it's about demonstrating critical thinking in various areas of your professional life, and one of them is reading and being able to apply up-to-date evidence. It's about your ability to weigh risks and benefits and different treatment options, to think about probabilities. And it's about structures like many other sessions, and you will hear about structures a lot. And Emma mentioned having a structured approach. A lot of more senior colleagues that may help you with your practice may say this. But I think it's super important in the critical appraisal station. And I think this is where a lot of trainees perhaps are lacking in when they approach their START preparation. They're approaching their preparation, and then in their discussion may not be as structured as in other stations. And then again, it's about showing an ability to discuss and apply shared decision making. when it comes to evidence-based treatments. And it's less about complex stats, or any stats for that matter. It's not so much about numbers. You're very unlikely to need to do any calculations. And it's not a test of how much you know around epidemiology and research methodology. So I have this slide at the end, but I decided to bring it to the start just to get people to relax about it. Because really, I think it's a really fun station. I think it's a really fun topic and very, very useful. And secondly, as I've already said, have structure, and I'll talk a lot about the structure of the critical appraisal. I think it's the most important part of your preparation. And remember that it's a discussion. Occasionally, last year when I was taking my START assessment and I was preparing, I had a lot of people that were panicking, looking for courses, last minute critical appraisal courses, registering, even going to different cities to attend a course. And that, I mean, it may sound like an exaggeration, but it breaks my heart, because I think this is things that we are able to do. We do it every day, even if you don't have regular journal clubs in your workplace. You are able to apply critical thinking, because that's what you do day in and day out. So rather than panicking and registering yourself on a course, just go back to the basics. I'll give you some techniques, and hopefully you'll be fine and you will enjoy this station as much as I did and some other people did. So unfortunately, we don't know much about how the station will be this year, which made it difficult to prepare this, my slides. So I'll just talk a little bit based on the structure that this station has had up until now, up until last year at least. So you were given a preparation station, you were given a scenario on a paper, you were given the paper with a research study that you were expected to appraise, and then you moved in with the assessor and you had your discussion session. So the preparation station traditionally has been shared with a prescription task, and it was a 44-minute station for both of the preparations. If that happens this time round in this diet, I'd suggest doing the prescription task first. And there's various reasons for that. The main one is that for the prescription, there's certain things that you need to put down on paper. They need to be down on your drug chart. There isn't much about making it up as you, not that you will be making critical appraisal up, but it's about, critical appraisal station is more about than discussion. So there's certain things you need to have in your prescription, just get them over and done with. And then no matter how much time you have left, you can focus on reading your paper and doing your appraisal. And this way, I think most people found it much easier. Also, sometimes prescription tasks are longer than you think, so they may take longer than the actual critical appraisal station, so just get it out of the way. And then you will be given a scenario. Usually it's a clinical case, a patient you encounter, or a parent that asks you a question, a junior colleague that asks you a question that you're not very sure about, or you want to look into the most recent evidence. So use this scenario at the start of your discussion with the assessor to relate it to the paper. Just a mention, just half a line. But then remember to come back to it at the end, and we will come back to that a bit later on. Now, with regards to reading the paper, do not, under any circumstances, even attempt to read the entire paper from start to finish. First of all, you will never get there. The time is just not enough. But also, even if you are a speed reader, you are most likely to miss the important information if you do that. Critical appraisal, you may have heard this before, is meant to be done within 10 minutes if you have some experience of doing that. And you do that by scanning and skimming through the paper. So essentially you're focusing on important sections of the paper. You can completely ignore some sections unless you have a major interest in the topic. And you are scanning for keywords or numbers. And you use the tables, of course, as well. And I suggest taking notes as you go along, and I'll show you an example of a structure. In the discussion, just with everything else, it's not meant to be a test, but in this station, it really is not testing your research methodology knowledge. And just remember that your assessors will be pediatric consultants. They're very unlikely to come from a very strong academic background, so they probably know as much as you do, or even less. So if you happen to be someone that's run research studies, is a research reviewer yourselves, have published and all of that, very well done. You probably know more than the assessors. This is not about showing off anybody's knowledge. Okay, so allow the assessor to contribute to the discussion, because that's what it's about. And show them that you have a structure in mind that you are following and that you have a critical approach. So mention your opinion as well, not just what the authors have found, for example. And I'm sure you've seen this multiple times so far in your career. So the hierarchy of evidence in a pyramid with research, different types of research studies. There's different variations of this. Most of you will know that systematic reviews and meta-analysis come relatively at the top. A lot of formats of this, a lot of versions of this place synthesis and synopsis at the top. It doesn't matter, high level of evidence with the lower level of evidence at the bottom. Now, in pediatrics in general, most of the studies that get published are actually observational studies, and observational studies fall lower down in the hierarchy of evidence. So a lot of studies are case control studies or cohort studies, and even big studies, robust with good methodology. And that's because of the types of questions we are asking. We are interested in following up patients longitudinally over time. We do have quite a few RCTs as well. And I think from speaking to people, RCTs and cohort studies do feature in the START assessment. That doesn't mean that you won't get any other type of study, but they are the commonest ones, I think, so far. Systematic reviews, even though they're high level of evidence, they aren't that common in pediatrics, but you may still get one. And if you've done anything, any courses or any training in evidence-based medicine, you will know that there are checklists for diagnostic studies, and that we like to cover diagnostic studies when we teach evidence-based medicine. Diagnostic studies fall somewhere between observational and RCTs, and they are, I love teaching diagnostic studies, reading diagnostic studies. I think most of the work we do in pediatrics is on diagnosis, but there aren't that many diagnostic studies being published in pediatrics, and a lot of people find them complex as well. So I think you are less likely to be given one of those. The reason I mention that is not because you don't need to prepare for them at all, but a lot of times I hear people preparing for statistics, trying to revise different concepts, different terms, statistics formulae, and they throw in specificity, sensitivity, and then odds ratios and hazard ratios. And that just shows probably a lack of structure. So the difference with diagnostic studies when it comes to your preparation is really that the statistics are different. We won't get much time to talk a lot about them today, but I've included some material, I've prepared some material, and I'm happy to share for you. The structure I suggest, and I'm in good company because I haven't made this up myself, can be used for any type of paper, any type of study you are given. And essentially, you start off by asking whether this paper that you've been given is relevant to you. Does it address the clinical question? And all you need to say really at the start of your discussion with the assessor is, I was given this scenario and I was given this paper, which according to the clinical scenario I was given was yielded through my literature search. I think it's relevant. And then you move on to your appraisal. I suggest breaking your appraisal notes in 3 sections. And if you have looked, which many of you would have done, looked at checklists, a common one, popular one is the CASP by the Critical Appraisal Skills Program, or the one by the Center of Evidence-Based Medicine. They also have a similar structure. They divide the assessment in 3 sections: validity, efficacy, and applicability. And that's pretty standard, really. Validity should always come first in your discussion and in your appraisal. Often we have the temptation to jump into results and tell the assessor at the start assessment what the paper found, and the numbers and whether it was important or not. But that's missing out the most important part of the critical appraisal, which is looking at whether the study was done well enough that it's actually worth reading on and reaching the results section. So validity is where you look for methodology, flaws, biases, systematic errors, and all of that. And then once you've covered that, then you can move on talking about the results. And all you really need to say sometimes is what the study found, whether the results are important clinically, and whether they are significantly, statistically important. In other words, could they be a fluke due to chance? And that's where statistics come in. And I'll mention a little bit more about that a bit later. And then never forget to leave some time for the applicability section, because this is where you will actually discuss with the assessor whether the results of the study are important to you and to your patient, whether this paper actually answered your clinical question, and this is where you relate back to the clinical scenario you were given. This is more or less the structure that we follow in journal clubs, but it's very important for the START assessment because your time is limited and you don't want to spend too much time talking about numbers and not talking about the applicability. So I just thought that since randomized controlled trials are generally the commonest types of studies that come up in critical appraisal, I'll focus my this part of the session on these, and then just talk a little bit briefly on about cohort studies. So the general approach, what I would recommend, and a lot of people recommend, is to read the abstract to start with, to get the overall idea. And just from reading the abstract, you will find that you may be able to answer quite a few of the validity questions that you need for your structured approach. And then some of the rest of the most important information you need will be in the methods section. The results, of course, but you don't need to go through the whole results section. Most of the times just looking at the tables is enough, and it's easy to do. And if you have time and you're interested, you can scan and skim through the discussion section of the paper, but it's not necessary if you run out of time, because the discussion will be about your own opinions. So in the validity section, more than any other section of the critical appraisal, remember we have 3 sections: validity, efficacy, and applicability. So start off by talking about validity. And this is where a lot of keywords come in, buzzwords that you need to look out for in the paper, and you need to mention as well. And if you use a checklist, which I strongly suggest you do, they guide you through most of these. Good checklists like the CASP one and the CEPM do this very well. They guide you through them. And you will be lucky if on this diet of the START assessment, I'm guessing you will be doing it from home. I don't really know how it will work. If you are allowed to use a checklist, then definitely use a checklist. Otherwise, in my times, you just memorize these things. You weren't allowed to take any papers with you. So important words are randomization, blinding, allocation, concealment. And for these ones, you will find some of the information mentioned even in the abstract, but I would suggest reading through the method section very quickly. It would be good to just mention what type of randomization they did. Blinding, was it double, single, triple blinding? And just remember, that's quite important. Don't just condemn a study because it was unblinded, because as many of you will know, some studies cannot be blinded ethically or pragmatically. And it's all about whether the outcomes could be measured objectively, even without them blinding. I have to say that I appreciate that some of you will have much more experience in this area than others. It's just the nature of the topic. It is what it is. Some people have more academic background than others. So apologies if this sounds quite patronizing or very basic to some of you. Hopefully I'm meeting most of you in the middle. Then for sample size, sometimes it's enough to just say that what you think. I think the participant size is small for such an important topic. But if you manage to just have a look to see if they had an a priori power calculation, that means calculating the sample size they would need in advance before starting the recruitment process. And then patient characteristics is another area that's generally mentioned in validity. You can just look at the results table. And there's usually a table with patient characteristics, and you can say they look pretty similar. Outcomes, what was a primary and secondary, and are the outcomes that the authors and the researchers were looking at directly related to your outcome of interest? Are they surrogate outcomes, not measuring exactly what you want them to measure? Follow-up, very important to mention, whether you think it was long enough for the condition, for example, you're looking into, and whether there was lots of attrition. And I think it's good to get comfortable with mentioning some types of biases that are relevant to each type of study. It just sounds good, but you don't have to, because I think if you just say there were significant losses to follow up, that could lead to bias. You are still in, you won't be marked down. Intention to treat is very important for RCTs, and that just means where all patients analyzed in the groups that they were randomized to be in. Usually it will be mentioned in the methods section or in the results section. So this is one that you may need to look through results as well. And then very quickly, as I said, even though we often get really hung up on to the statistics and the numbers, and this is what scares a lot of people, actually you won't spend a lot of time talking about the numbers during your assessment. Sometimes it's just enough to tell the assessor what the results were, what the study found, and perhaps how they were reported. And that's where you may need to do some preparation in advance. For example, being able to say whether it was a relative or an absolute way in which they measured this, and I'll direct you to some resources that you just need to listen to, watch, or read, and you'll have it. The magnitude of effect, essentially, was the risk ratio suggestive of a beneficial outcome with the intervention compared to the control or not? Risk ratio of 0.75, for example, would suggest that the outcome you're measuring, the intervention you're administering makes it 25% less likely for the population to experience a certain side effect. I'm just giving you a rough example. Just being able to make some sense out of these numbers. And that's not difficult to do. I'm just going to give you some very basic resources, and that's all you need to know about interpreting numbers. And then, of course, statistical significance. Could they be due to chance? Do not fall into the trap of seeing a significant p-value, for example, less than 0.05, and saying, oh yes, therefore the results are very significant. Because then you need to, of course, correlate it to the clinical, make the clinical inference, right? Good example would be if delivering some extra medication to patients presenting with asthma would shorten their duration, length of stay by 2 hours in hospital. That's clearly clinically not very important, not very significant, but statistically, you may get very significant results. So these are the little areas of statistics that you may be caught in. But other than that, I don't think they will ask you to do anything very complicated. If the RCT reports numbers needed to treat, which are actually very important for RCTs, and it's actually the one calculation that's intuitive to us as clinicians. Nonetheless, a lot of authors leave it out of their paper. But if it is mentioned, then I would suggest you mention it to the assessor because it looks good, especially knowing how to interpret it. And I'll give you a resource that will tell you everything you need to know about that. Precision, if you feel confident, use confidence intervals. If you don't feel confident using them, then, you know, just avoid it unless it's necessary. Okay, and then leave enough time, couple of minutes, to move on to the applicability section because it's very important. Or be alert for cues from the assessor prompting you towards this because they want you to come to that part. They don't want you to carry on talking about statistics forever. And what this section is asking for is your judgment, but the discussion section of the paper may be useful as well. Just don't get too hung up onto what the authors have said. Have your own critique as well of the paper. Because it's all about deciding whether the patients of the study were similar to yours, the setting, whether the results were generalizable, and if the evidence, if the treatment is feasible in your setting. And of course, with every journal club discussion, and more importantly with this one, just mention whether this paper will affect your practice, change your practice. As a rule of thumb, it's very rare for one single study to dramatically change one's practice or to change guidelines, unless it's a very big study or it's a meta-analysis. So you can never go wrong mentioning that this is just one study with flaws perhaps, or a small one. I would like to see further studies done on this topic, or studies looking more specifically in this category of patients. Or if there are more similar studies, I would like to see them pulled together in a meta-analysis, for example, to provide higher level of evidence. I think that would give you good chances of scoring well in this section because you are showing some understanding of evidence-based medicine, and you are also showing that you are able to think. Someone talking to me. Okay. So if you want to make one calculation and you have time to make a single calculation, I would suggest you make it a number needed to treat if it's not already given. Because we don't have time to go through it now, I'm giving you this link here from the Center of Evidence-Based Medicine, which will take you through a very brief and systematic way of calculating it. And you will impress the assessor. But if you find it stressful, you're running out of time, it's way better to reach the applicability section than to be talking about numbers needed to treat that you have calculated. You can just mention, if I had more time, I would like to calculate a number needed to treat for this absolute risk action that I've been given. So I think the major part of your preparation in terms of RCTs for the START assessment should be just going through a couple of checklists. And I'm giving you, these are links that you can click on. I think this presentation can go on the Trello board. If it does, just click on it and it will take you straight to EBM. They are similar and they follow this structure of validity, efficacy, applicability. And then just to give you an example of how I structure these sessions. So excuse the lousy handwriting. I tried to pretend that I was in a real time pressured scenario, she says. So I just prepared this last night really, and it took a minute. When you are given the paper, just write down, take a blank piece of paper and divide it into 3 sections. You can use color coding if colors work for you, validity, results, or efficacy and applicability, and then just write in advance before you start reading the paper, just by knowing what type of study you've been given, the area, the questions that you want to answer, the information that you want to find in your paper. It's going to make it so much easier. And sometimes for some of these areas, it's enough to just tick and just remember to mention it in the discussion. For some of them, you can take very brief notes. It didn't answer my question across, and that will prompt you during the discussion to cover all of these. So it will help you to be very structured during your discussion. You won't be too stressed digging for the information, looking through the paper and all of that. It's just a suggestion. As I said, I don't know how it will work this year. Who knows? As if you need to know these kinds of stuff, right? Only kidding. I think it's going to be pretty similar. And if you are allowed to use a checklist, then all the better for you. Approach to cohort studies is very similar. I'm gonna make these slides available, as I said, and I would suggest you just read through the little differences that you may have. For example, we rarely talk about randomization in cohort studies, recruitment, there are different questions that you may need to answer, but overall the structure is very, very similar. So it's validity, efficacy, and applicability. The applicability section is almost identical, almost, okay? One thing to remember, not just for cohort studies, but for any observational study, I would suggest don't forget to mention confounding. Yeah, it's very important in observational studies because you don't have any ways to control for confounders in the design of the study, in the recruitment of the patients. But then you need to be able to mention some confound factors that you think are important. I've included, oops, I've lost my, I wasn't, okay. So I've shared at the bottom of the, I'm hoping that you can see my screen again now. At the bottom of some of my slides, I've put some comments that you can read if you go back and read the presentation through Trello. So I was looking for ways to give you more information in such a tiny space of time. So just read what a confounder is if you can remember, and remember to mention it if you're given an observational study. I think the assessor will like it. I would like it. And then for the applicability section, if you're given an observational study, I would suggest just mentioning that one of the limitations of observational designs is that, for example, you can't be entirely sure that the effect you're seeing is due to correlation and not causation, then confounding and all of that. But bear in mind that some questions can only be answered through observational studies, and that's often the case in pediatrics, neonatal medicine, and all of that. So again, don't condemn a study because of the observational design. Just be critical, have an open mind, and just discuss all of these considerations with the assessor. I don't think the Center of Evidence-Based Medicine has a checklist for cohort studies, but the CASP have a very good one. And it may be the only thing you need to read about cohort studies because, as I said, they include little points to guide you. And then maybe revisit this presentation if you found it any useful at all. You can have a look at some other types of studies. And again, you can do that through reading the checklists, such as case control studies, which are observational studies again. Systematic reviews are very important. But as I said, they don't feature so commonly in the STAR assessment. But make sure you can identify a forest plot if you see it and can perform a basic interpretation of it. And if you can't, just don't panic, because I've included a couple of videos that I found very useful from Cochrane, so they have to be good, right? So you can again click on these links and they will tell you the basics that you need to know about forest plots, and there you have it. Diagnostic studies, as I said, I really like them, but they're less likely to come up. And this is where we talk about sensitivity, specificity, predictive values, pre and post test probabilities, all of those things that you had to learn for your Part 1, 2 exams that you've all passed, but you have forgotten, which is very common. So if you want a refresher, I've made some slides I've put together from my various other teaching material I've had, which again, you can get if you click on this link. It's going to take you to a Google Drive presentation. You may or may not find it useful, but if you really want to be super prepared for the critical appraisal section of the station of the START assessment, then just make sure that you refresh these concepts as well. But as I said, if you haven't got much time, you really enjoy reading, why would you not enjoy this? But anyway, if you really, if this is not your cup of tea really, focus on RCTs and perhaps some observational cohort studies. And there's a CASP checklist for diagnostic studies there as well. And finally, just some suggestions, general suggestions about how to approach your preparation time now. I know it's not ideal that no one really knows how the assessment will be run, and particularly for this station, but just start thinking of potential clinical questions that you have or that may come up, and how you would approach a discussion with someone. And you know, some of you will have study buddies for the START assessment. Start doing some preparation on the critical appraisal, and you don't need to do the full critical appraisal. Maybe just do the validity section one day, then another day just do a little bit on results, then talk a little bit about applicability and how you would frame your answers to the assessor, and perhaps take some recent copies of the archives, pick an RCT and an observational study you find, and work through them as if they were START stations using your checklist. And I'll give you some other resources as well in the next slide. Think about different types of biases that you would want to look out for depending on the question and the type of the study to be in the right mindset. And again, it's all about having a structure in your mind, and that comes with a bit of practice, not too much practice. Again, read the checklist to be familiar. And you know, in your START preparation, those of you that will choose to prepare, because some people just don't prepare and they do equally as well, there's some documents that are really long, so you will find that you're reading a lot. If you reach the point where you just can't have any more, your eyes cannot read anything else, maybe try some of the audiobook suggestions that I'm giving you or the video resources. You will find it calming, and you will have someone taking you through the statistics rather than having to read them and do all of them brain work. I find that that works for me. So some main resources, this is the final slide, we're running out of time. So this is for the basic preparation. Yeah, if you don't do anything else, but you want to do some critical appraisal preparation, I would suggest looking at checklists, as I've already said. You will find them on Trello as well, and I've provided links through this presentation as well, as I said. Understanding health research is a good interactive resource that you can use working through a certain paper. It's similar to having a checklist, it takes you through it, so I think you'll find that quite fun. And most people I shared the next resource with last year when we were preparing found it useful. So I've put it on Trello, and I think it will be a good one. If you have access to Apple Books, you can play it as an interactive session. Otherwise, you can just read it as a PDF, which is also on Trello. And it just shows you how to appraise an asset in 10 minutes. And I think you will find that after watching that or reading that, you will be much more relaxed about the critical appraisal section. If you want to go a little bit deeper, then we have a website testing treatments, and I suggest which chapters you can listen to. It's an audiobook just for your relaxation time, and some other resources. Luckily this year, I mean, there were lots of inconveniences, to say the least, with this weird year we've had. But we've had lots of teaching on critical appraisal through the London School of Paediatrics, and some of you may have taken part in some of those virtual sessions. They are all, or many of them are on YouTube, on the London School of Paediatrics channel, and you can find them there. And really, I think you will make a head start on your preparation if you visit some of those videos compared to, I guess, previous years. There's a few more resources on Trello, but really I would suggest you just do a structured approach to your preparation as well. The more is not always better, because you don't want to get too stressed out and too confused about it. As I said, I don't think you need to go on a course for your START preparation, but if you're sitting START in March and not now, and you're just starting to prepare early, I'd suggest you choose one that is not just basic critical appraisal, because you don't need to pay for that. We provide it for free. The London School of Paediatrics does. I'm happy to run another session if you want to. So choose something that has an overall evidence-based medicine focus, and preferably a pediatric one. I'm suggesting the Institute of Child Health, but I may not be totally unbiased because I've been teaching on that course as well. So coming back to my biggest pieces of advice, just relax. It's not the end of the world. Nothing is the end of the world. And even if things don't go very well during this station, you can just remediate afterwards. And I'm very happy to be contacted for ideas about remediation and set up maybe a virtual session that you can attend, and then we can take it off for everyone. Have a structure the way I've suggested it. That's my suggestion. And remember, it's a discussion. And then again, as Emma mentioned earlier, make it worth your effort. All of the insights and skills that you will gain through your preparation will be very useful in your career. So just start use all of the things, all of the little tips and tricks you will be getting by working through the structured approach of critical appraisal. Use them not just in your journal clubs, but whenever you want one clinical question in your practice. So good luck. There used to be a WhatsApp group. I don't know if it's still on for START. If you want to a further session, not necessarily with me, with some other colleagues that I have that are tutors of evidence-based medicine with me, I think we can put something together when we know more about the structure of this station, about how it will be run this year. So just let me know. I'm happy to be contacted.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you, really, Harris. You've had, I can tell you've done a lot of work for this and given us lots of lovely resources, which for sure we'll put on Trello, no problem at all. So I don't think we really have time for questions at the moment, but Harris, if you just put your email address, then maybe people can contact you directly, if that's okay, in the chat.
Absolutely.
We will take a like a 7-8 minute break. We'll come back at 7:50 for our next speaker, who's Jane Runnacles, talking about quality improvement. Because there's so many of us on here, if you are planning to stay, you're more than welcome. If for whatever reason you have to shoot off, then please log off so that if other people wish to join, then they can. Thank you again for attending, and we'll see you again at 7:50.
Okay then, I think we should crack on, Jane, if that's all right. I hope everyone's got a drink of their choosing.
No worries.
Lovely Morette's got a night shift to go to, so I just want to say thank you to her for being wonderful and helping me organise this. We didn't quite expect it to be so popular. I hope your shift goes well, Morette.
Thank you, take care.
Bye-bye, darling. Right, Jane, stop talking and hand over to you, darling.
Oh, well, listen, thank you, Najette, and thank you, Merit, for organising all of this. Honestly, it's absolutely outstanding what you guys do in the Trainees Committee, and we're very grateful, so thank you. I have the task of talking about quality improvement, which, if any of you know me, it's something I'm quite passionate about, and I could probably talk all day and certainly talk for Britain about QI. So I'm going to do a real whiz through and try and pick out some of the bits that would be relevant for START. So please do put stuff in the chat box if you want me to go back and focus on anything. But otherwise, I've got some slides I'll whiz through, and happy to take any questions at the end. So I'm a consultant at St George's, and I'm also TPD for Education for the School of Peds. So obviously I work with Najette and Merit, and we also run the QI Change Champions programme, which maybe some of you have been on. So apologies if you've heard me talk about this before. So in terms of QI for START, the kind of thinking about quality of healthcare for children and young people, you can think about it in these kind of 6 domains, and this is taken from the US Institute of Medicine. So you can read all these slides in your own leisure, but essentially you could be asked in a START station to think about improving quality in your service for any of these 6 domains. We all know that there's a huge variation in the quality of care that children and young people get in the UK, and the Atlas of Variation illustrates this with good data, and we know that there's some variation which is warranted. So for some things it's, you know, that there is variation and that's important, but actually it's that unintended variation which is a real problem. So I don't know if any of you've heard of this paediatrician. This is an American paediatrician who is absolutely amazing. He's a absolute QI guru, and his name is Don Berwick. And if you can look on YouTube and watch any of his clips, I'd highly recommend it. And what you may not know, although you've probably all heard of the mid-staffs inquiry and the reports that followed, actually Don Berwick was brought in to think about quality of healthcare in the UK, and he wrote the Berwick report in response to the mid-staffs report. And what he said is how important it is to place the quality of patient care, particularly patient safety, above all other aims. And his report's called A Promise to Learn, A Commitment to Act. So it's a good one to know about for your consultant interview. So going back to QI in healthcare, you know, a simple way of putting it is doing the right thing at the right time in the right way for the right person to get the best possible results, and doing it in the right place. And this is quite a nice way of framing it for a START station, thinking about improving quality. And the thing I'm really passionate about is thinking about moving beyond audit. So clinical audit has a really important role in healthcare, but actually, you know, what you guys can do is think about getting involved in QI. And obviously it's one of the domains for progress that you should be matching against for your ALCPs. But it's certainly something that will be woven into START, even though it may not be an obvious station. Hopefully I can give you some of the tools that you could use and refer back to. I've skipped ahead, sorry. So there's lots of links to your curriculum. That's also very multi-professional, as it should be in quality improvement. And actually it links through to the GP curriculum, the nursing curriculum, and is something that all junior doctors should get involved with. So usually I like to do quite an interactive talk, but I'm going to get you to try and kind of engage your brain a bit after your break. Think about a problem you've encountered at work. So a mistake waiting to happen, a frustration of yours about the way you work, something that wastes your time perhaps. Actually, this is something that could be asked about in a START station. So how would you address a similar problem? So I know someone who was asked how to reduce outpatient DNA rates. You know, how would you go about this? And the first step you need to think about is how you understand that problem better. So what do you need to think about in order to address that problem? So have a little think whilst I'm talking about one of these areas, and we'll work through that in this talk. So I see QI as a bit of a toolkit for improving things, and these are some of the tools that you can think about which may be helpful for your start station. You can refer to these. You might actually use the structure in your head whilst you're talking to the examiner about how you address this particular problem. And the great thing about QI is all of these tools, the information and templates, all available online, free, open access. If you Google these and Google QI in healthcare, most people who are passionate about QI are open to sharing, and you know, you can look up all the stuff. So let's start with the basics, and this is the, probably if you don't remember anything about my talk, this is the take-home message, the model for improvement. So I'm going to put it to you guys. There's 100 of you here. Some of you must know what goes in these boxes. So you probably all know what goes in the circular box at the bottom. Do people want to type in the chat? Be brave. Anybody come up with what that, there's 4 letters here. Got a few people coming up. Oh, we're up to 8 here. Planned Use Study Act, PDSA, fantastic. That's really good. So a lot of people know about PDSA, and actually PDSA has become a bit of a buzzword. It's, you know, oh, I'm going to do PDSA. Well, that's great, but actually what's really important is what goes before the PDSA, which are these 3 boxes. So can anybody tell me what goes in the first box, or the general gist of what goes in the first box? Aim, yep. Brilliant. Smart, yep, so the aim needs to be smart. That's really important. So aim is, how, you know, what is it we want to achieve? It's not intervention yet. Okay, what's the second box? Measure, yeah. So how do we know that a change is an improvement? Because not all change is an improvement. And then the third box, for brownie points. Anyone know what goes in the third box? Change ideas, amazing. You've obviously been on the QI Change Champions program. So what changes can we make that result in improvement? For those of you who are really smart, you might have seen that I skipped on to my next slide by mistake, and here it is. So here we go again. So the first 3 boxes are so important. Now you could use this in your start station to say, well, I would use the model for improvement, and the first question I want is to try and really establish what we're trying to accomplish. Now that sounds obvious, but actually it requires a lot of work to really delve down and work out what the issue is, what the problem is. Once you've got that smart aim, you can actually work out a measure fairly easily related to that. And it always frustrates me when people come up with about 10 or even 20 different measures that they're going to look at. Keep it really simple, keep to 1 or 2 measures that are important, and there's more we could talk about measures in a minute. And then change ideas. So what changes can we make that result in improvement? And then we'll test out those change ideas with PDSA cycles. But the important thing is that you actually start the analysis of the data whilst you're doing a PDSA, and you study really carefully, comparing the data to what you predict was going to happen, and then decide about your next cycle, your next PDSA. You plan it, comparing what was happening and actually summarizing what was learned. So that's really important. So I'm going to whiz through, but essentially, in summary, improvement requires a really clear aim, which is SMART. I'm sure you all know about SMART. Really put a time frame to it. Think about your measures and then your action. So how is it you're going to know that you've achieved your goal or achieved your aim? think really carefully about where you have influence within your team and your system. So there's some things that will be outside of your influence. And, you know, you could talk about this in your start station, but really change begins with yourself. So if you can't see yourself being able to make a change or see that through, then no one else is going to be able to, because you're going to be the most motivated here. Generally with the process of QI, really getting to understand what the problem is, writing that SMART aim is the first step. But then you need to spend a lot of time doing what we call diagnostics and really understanding it. So then you can define your measures, test your change ideas, act on the feedback, and then the really difficult bit is around sustainability. And that's something quite good to talk about, because actually a lot of people embark on improvement without thinking about how they're going to sustain that change. So one way of looking at the process and understanding it a bit better, you know, you've got some data perhaps, but actually if you can map a process map, you can actually identify where the unnecessary delays are, where there's waste or duplication of effort, where things don't make sense, and where the bottlenecks are. And, you know, here's a steps for making a process map, but it could be anything, like making a cup of tea in the morning. The first step, define, is that when you take the mug out of the cupboard, or is it when you have that decision, I want a cup of tea? And the last step in the process, is that the kind of, you know, putting milk in the cup, or is it picking the cup up? So define your process and then really map it with all your stakeholders, everybody involved. And if you talk about process mapping, that's quite a useful tool that be used for many things, such as reducing DNA rates for clinics. So your process map could look like this. And this shows that the whole team have got involved. And actually there's, you know, it's quite complicated, but this could be something that is really beneficial because you actually understand where the problem is. Fishbone diagrams are another useful tool where you can think about all the factors that impact on a problem. And, you know, it might be thinking about catheter infection. It's not just about the patient and about, you know, what's going on for them. It might be the equipment, it might be the environment, and it might be things to do with the healthcare professionals, so things like hand washing. So these are all the things that impact on it, and fishbone diagrams are another useful tool. The Pareto principle is really interesting, and this kind of makes you think about how you can focus your efforts. And I always say, you know, pick the low-hanging fruit. Where can you have the greatest influence to actually get the best output? So 20% of your time, resources, effort can account for 80% of the output. So brainstorm 2, this is over to you, another yellow slide. Think about what you're hoping to achieve with your problem. If you can, write down a SMART aim. Think about it being really specific and measurable, something that's achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And then think about, once you've got that SMART aim, how will you know that a change is an improvement? So I don't know if any of you've seen this picture before. I think it's brilliant. This is, I don't know all the details, you may correct me if I'm wrong, but this is an old painting in a chapel in Spain. And they wanted it restored, didn't have the money. Someone in the congregation said, actually, I'm pretty good at art. I can restore your painting. And it's definitely a change, but I'm not sure we'd say it was an improvement. When you think about measurement, measurement for improvement is different from measurement for research. Measurement for improvement is thinking about, you know, forgetting about the biases. You know, in research, you control for as many biases as possible. In improvement, the biases are stabilized. You gather just enough data to learn and complete another PDSA. So collect just a small amount of data and, you know, think about sequential observable tests to bring that new knowledge into daily practice. So there's different types of measures I'm not going to go into now, but there's outcome measures, so more like the quality outcomes, what's happening for the patient. There's process measures, you know, what's going on in the process that actually results in that outcome. And balancing measures, so are there unintended consequences to what you're doing? This is what I love, a little exercise that we do in the QI Change Champions program. How many sheep are here? You can put in the chat, but hopefully we'll all agree there's 3 sheep. But how many sheep are here? So some people say 3, some people say actually there's 2 sheep and 1 lamb. You know, when you're thinking about your measures, you have to be really clear what it is you're looking at and define what you mean, because if you're relying on other people to collect that data, or if you're looking at data that isn't your own, you need to be clear what you're counting, what your measures are. So what's in the name? What were they aiming here? Presumably, we think they were aiming to restore the painting to its former glory. Actually, what happened was that this hit the press. The number of tourists visiting this chapel in this tiny village in Spain massively increased and brought in a huge amount of money from the tourist industry. And actually, you know, what was their aim? In the end, they did very well out of this, not quite what they'd intended. When we're thinking about data and measurement, a really easy thing to do, which, you know, is very much encouraged in quality improvement, is creating a run chart, which is literally plotting the dots. It could be over time. The x-axis may change, and obviously the y-axis will depend on what your measure is. Define your baseline, be clear on what it is you're collecting to start with before you test out your change ideas, and then plot the mean to that baseline. And on this chart, there's upper and lower control limits, which are a bit more complex, but just to reassure those of you who are more interested in statistics, you can actually use SPC charts or statistical process charts to actually statistically prove that a change is an improvement. On a simpler level, you could use other rules, run chart rules, which you can look up, it's all available online, to think about any change. So clearly, in most systems, there's normal variation, and it's normal. So number of crash calls outside ICU or number of attendants to A&E, it's normal that it varies from day to day. But there may be some trends that you notice, and actually, if there's a run of 7 or more consecutive points above or below the mean, that might indicate that there's an improvement. And obviously, if there's these 7 consecutive points in an upward direction or downward direction, that may also show that there's an improvement. Don't get too caught up on this. There's other people who can help you with data, and there's, you know, lots of online resources to help. What also is interesting is to kind of deep dive and learn from those that fall outside of that normal variation. So we call these special causes. So why is it that that particular month in February 2013, the number of readmissions to ICU within 48 hours was outside of what we normally expect? And actually that can help understand where the problem areas are and where you can focus improvement. So going back to your problem, or the problem you may be given in the station, think about how you'll know that a change is an improvement. So how will you measure? You know, what data will you collect? They might ask you to come up with that idea in your station. And really interestingly, how can you share this data? So that requires you to think a bit about your stakeholders. Now, there's lots of ways you can map stakeholders. This is one way, looking at their kind of power and influence and their interest and support. And I think any of you who've done any sort of work in around audit or improvement can probably identify some of these people. The key ally who's going to be really, you know, engaged, those who are going to sit on the fence, but you kind of need to keep them informed of what's going on. And there'll be those who actually make your life difficult. And it's thinking about these people really carefully at the start. So think about stakeholder mapping as part of your problem. And then we've talked about PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act. And do these sequential PDSAs, and over time, starting really small, you may be able to collect the data to show change that results in improvement. This is an example around improving or reducing surgical site infections. If you look at PDSA cycle 1, it's literally just the anaesthetist giving the antibiotic to 4 patients and documenting the time that the surgery started and ended. So think about this. This is the anaesthetist doing it with their own list for 1 or 2 or even 4 patients, just to see, test out, does this work? Because if it doesn't work for you, it's not going to work for others. And then gradually over time, test out these PDSA cycles with more people and more patients, and engaging your colleagues, thinking about the early adopters, thinking about those colleagues of yours who will pick up and run with this idea. So go back to your idea again. what changes can we make that will result in improvement? So what PDSA changes, small change ideas, and have a bit of blue sky thinking here. Think about things outside, outside of the box. What ideas can you try? Listen to your colleagues. What ideas do they have? Actually, I've got an idea here. Let's try it out. So the reality is, it's hard to engage people in change, and sometimes, it's really difficult. And I think you can acknowledge this. They wouldn't want you in your start station to kind of imply that you find it really easy to make big changes to a service or, make improvements. And actually, if you're a new consultant in a department, it can be really difficult. Look at this cartoon. I want you to find a bold and innovative way to do everything exactly the same way it's been done for 25 years. And we often come across this. I'm sure you have before. Really interesting approach is to actually say, go back to your patient, your child, your young person, and try and view the clinical setting through their eyes. And this is so important. It should be something we do all the time, but it's very easily forgotten. Sometimes it's a lot easier not to involve children and young people. But there are lots of tools out there. This is a 15-step challenge, which basically the kind of gist of it is that within 15 steps of walking onto a ward or a department, a child, young person or their carer can actually really pick up on what the environment's like. So think about co-creating improvement, think about really family focus, think about shared decision making. There's lots of resources out there. There's the NHS Youth Forum, there's Health Watch opportunities, and very relevant for us, RCPCH and us has lots of online resources, recipes for engagement. And it'd be brilliant if you brought that into your start station. I'm sure it would earn you lots of points. So just to kind of wrap up, in terms of key learning points, really try and understand the problem. So you might be given a problem in the station, think about the tools you've got, be clear about how you can define your aim. So, you could start by saying that I'd really want to understand what's going on here. I'd like to collect some further data. I'd like to talk to the relevant stakeholders, the right people, and then I'd define a SMART aim. Based upon that, I would work out what measurement is important. So I'd like to know that if I test out new ideas or change ideas or interventions, that I've got the data to back this up. So measurement is key. Think about who you can engage in collecting that data. So often at Trust, there's people outside of your department who, are involved in data or IT. Think about that in a creative way. And when you're planning a project, plan, and plan some more. You can't do enough planning. And what's really important, I think, is particularly when you rotate through different departments, is that you can actually bring new ideas, sharing seamlessly, stealing shamelessly, obviously acknowledging people who've done the work, but actually that's a really important thing to think about. And finally, if you are vaguely interested and inspired by some of the stuff I've talked about, at the London School of Paediatrics, we do run a QI programme, QI Change Champions. We've got a new programme in the autumn. There are a few places left. What I would guarantee is that if you put the work in over that time period, so it's over 18 weeks, a little bit of work each week, it's got to be something completely aligned to the job you do. We wouldn't expect you to work on an improvement project outside of your workplace, but certainly something that you can do over those 18 weeks. You'd have a very good chance of not only having an amazing project to talk about, consultant interview, you'd also learn about many of these tools, certainly understand the model for improvement and how you could apply that in your start station, and have a very good chance of publishing your work. So if you are interested, all the details are on the School of Paediatrics website, but I'm very happy for you to contact me if you're interested. As I said, we have only got a few places left, so please move fast, but it is a fantastic virtual programme. And I think on that note, I'm actually finishing a bit early. I talk very fast. So I'm just going to see if there's some more questions. do fire them at me. And good luck with your start. Do you want me to take some questions, Najat?
I've been following the chat and there hasn't been any, but
No.
I think speak now, forever hold your peace, I suppose is the best way of putting it.
Yeah.
I can always come back to you if people message me later on.
No worries, that's great.
Oh, someone's got a question. Could you please share some platforms to publish?
Okay, well, I can talk very quickly about that. Because if you're a paediatrician, the best place to share is on archives, education and practice. And I'm actually one of the editors for the equipment QI reports. They're very easy to publish if you've got some data. So if you look up equipment QI reports and instructions for authors, you can either email me via that via archives to discuss a project, or if you submit, if you're happy you've met everything on the template, you can submit it and put in your cover letter that you'd like it on the equipment QI reports platform.
Marvellous.
If not archives, BMJ, yes, so there's BMJ quality improvement reports, but you do have to subscribe to that. There's lots of other places obviously, but a fairly easy way to get a kind of child or young person centered project published is through archives.
Marvellous. Any more for any more? I think most of them want to be added to the Trello board.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks so much.
It was a complete whiz through. There's so much more I could talk about, but hopefully what my take-home message is refer back to the methodology, refer to some of the tools, and you know, think carefully about how you approach these questions in a structured way. And good luck, everyone.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks for giving up your time.
No worries. Thank you, Najat. Take care.
All right, lovely. Take care now. Speak soon.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, so I'm not trying to multitask and add everyone to this Trello board. I feel like there might be quite a lot. So the next speaker is lovely Emily Cadman, who's going to whiz through kind of the ethics, potential ethics station. Emily, are you there?
I am, yeah. Oh, that almost sounds like Eurovision, doesn't it?
What?
That almost sounds like Eurovision Song Contest.
Yeah, it does. Shall I be like, what's his name? Who does the thingy? The Irish lad.
Don't worry, anybody. I'm not going to sing. You can relax about that.
Nil point, not nil point.
Nil point.
You want to share your screen, darling?
I'm going to. I'm trying to.
Okay.
There we go. Perfect. Does that work?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Grand.
Hello. Hi guys. My name's Emily. I'm a ST8 in PemGrid, but this year I've been working in PICU. So I'm afraid lots of my examples are emergency-based or critical care. But as I'm talking and coming up with my examples, just think about where you work and your department and your speciality, and think about how it applies to you. I also have a background in medical ethics and law, which is why I've been asked to lead this session tonight. I was given the topic of ethics, consent and law for START, and I want to make this as relevant to you guys and relevant to START as possible. So I'm actually going to park ethics and just concentrate on the consent and law side of things, looking at the tricky bits and looking at the tricky bits that might come up in START. The guy jumping into the swimming pool is not just to remind most of us that we haven't had our summer holiday this year, but is to say jump in, probably via the chat if you've got any questions. He'll pop up at various other points where you have to slightly think about things. I'm not going to talk about safeguarding because Feta's going to do that, and she's much better placed to talk about that than I am. But obviously there are overlaps between the legal side of things and safeguarding. So the tricky bits, I had to think about what came up in my mind as tricky, and I think the main issues are consent. So who can consent, who's got parental responsibility, how we tease it apart when people disagree. We can touch a little bit on the cheerful topic of death and death certification, and then think about adolescent confidentiality and sexual activity. So not a lot to cover. So I'm going to try and whip through it, and I'm going to try and finish on time because I'm appalling at that. So children and consent. Obviously, it goes without saying that no treatment can be given without some form of consent. Obviously, with adults, we're all assumed to have capacity to consent for our own treatment. And actually, once children hit the magic 16, they automatically gain that right to consent to medical treatment. And they're covered by the Mental Capacity Act, just like we as adults are. However, the difference is, at the age of 16, they don't gain the automatic right to refuse treatment, especially if that's life-saving or life-changing treatment. So for that grey area, like with a lot of paediatrics between 16 and 18, you just have to slightly think. And actually, when I was first preparing this talk back in February for the last group, I was thinking, well, hang on, as paediatricians, we never look after anyone over the age of 16. That's irrelevant. But actually, in the last few months, some of us have been looking after the slightly older kids and younger adults to try and take the slack off adult services a bit. So it has come up. So at 16, you can consent, but you can't actually refuse until you get to 18. Below 16, consent for treatment can come from one of two people. If the child is Gillick competent, they can consent themselves. If they're not Gillick competent, then you have to get that consent from any person who's got parental responsibility, which obviously then begs the question of, well, who's got parental responsibility? So have a bit of a think, but in essence, in my mind, you can divide it into two. So family and others. So family, you've got to start with the child's biological mother. So that's the person who's carried that pregnancy and given birth to that baby, which comes into surrogacy issues. So biological mother always has parental responsibility. The child's biological father, and this is when that whole long list comes up, if the parents are married at the time of birth, not at the time of conception, but if they're married at the time of birth, father automatically has PR as well. If he's put on the birth certificate, he has parental responsibility. Or if he hasn't been put on the birth certificate, but he applies and has been given parental responsibility order, then he has parental responsibility, whatever the status of the parents' relationship is. That whole bit about the birth certificate thing, that kicked in December 2003. So actually that, apart from the odd 18-year-old that you'll have in your services, most of our children now are entirely covered with that. And therefore you can, as a sort of quick question to parents, is the father on the birth certificate? Other relatives, as well as the biological parents, can have parental responsibility under certain circumstances. So usually grandparents, aunts or uncles, but only if they've applied for a parental responsibility order or a special guardianship. And that's very, very sort of niche legal details, but they have to have gone through a process. So just think when you're sitting in clinic and a granny brings in her grandchild to respiratory clinic, she may have permission from the mum to bring her to clinic because mum's at work, but she probably doesn't actually have PR and so can't consent to treatment. So just have that in your mind. When we think about other people who might have parental responsibility, the obvious classic one is the local authority. So if a child's under care, so under an emergency protection order or an interim care order, then PR is shared. And that's shared between anyone on this side of the screen, anyone in the family who has PR, and also shared with the local authority. Just because the local authority are involved and have PR, it doesn't actually take away parental responsibility from any of the family members. Ideally, consent is normally obtained by both the local authority and the family, but under circumstances, local authority can apply for the family to be overruled. Having said that the mother always, always, always has PR, there's one exception to that, which is the same exception to the rule that the local authority always share PR. And that's if the child is subject to a freeing order, which is a horrid, horrid phrase, but it essentially is what happens very near the end of the adoption process. So the mother signs a freeing order, which gives up her parental responsibility. And at that point, only the local authority have PR, right up until the moment when the adoption process goes ahead, at which point the adoptive parents gain PR and have as much PR as if they were the biological parents. So why is this of any relevance to you guys? It comes up in START because they might throw you a sort of disagreement scenario. Essentially, either if one of the two parents disagree with each other, or if the two parents are in agreement with each other but are disagreeing with you, how you then tease all of that apart. So we'll go into some of those possibilities now. So what do we do when parents disagree with each other? You're there as the peds reg in A&E, desperately trying to crack on and run your resus, and the parents having argy-bargy about whether they want their child to have, I don't know, IV antibiotics. No, bad example. Let's say adrenaline. This child is having an anaphylactic reaction and needs adrenaline. One parent wants it, the other doesn't. You can say, this is a medical emergency. If I don't give this treatment now, your child's going to die. Carry on your argument outside. I'm going to carry on and provide treatment in the best interests of the child. And that's easy. A&E is lovely and simple. That's why people like me go into it. What becomes harder, you can only do that and go down the best interest route if it's a true medical emergency. In a non-emergency, but when that care is essential, so salbutamol in acute asthma, antibiotics, something that needs to be done, but not that second, you do need to get your consent, but it's only required from a single person. So if you think back to that grid of however many different people who can have PR, you just need it from one of them. And that's what this little cartoon and this gratuitous photo of my front door and a couple of curly tops is about. It's the nearest I could get to anything remotely peds into a law talk, I'm afraid. One of the judges in the family court years ago said, think of consent as the key to unlock a door. Treatment is on the other side of that locked door, and to get to the point where you can give your patient treatment, you need to be able to unlock it. In a medical emergency, you've got that kind of the green glass button thing that you smash and all the fire alarms go off, but the door's open. That's fine, you can do that in an emergency, but in a non-emergency situation, you need someone with a key to unlock that door. And that essentially is any one person on that whole list of people with PR. So if you're wanting to give your antibiotics and mother is agreeing, dad is disagreeing, you say to the mum, great, I'm taking your consent, I'm going to cannulate your child and give the antibiotics. And that's all you need to do. And it's up to the person who's disagreeing to go and get court involvement if they want to. Now that's a little bit different if we kind of move down the acuity situation, ladder, and we move to something that's completely elective. And the classic one they talk about in all of the books is sort of cultural circumcision. And at that point, where one parent is consenting and the other is disagreeing, as the doctor in charge of that consent process, you must get a judicial review. Now, actually, as paediatricians, that's probably less relevant to us. And the reason for that judicial review is actually to protect that doctor from any fallout from the parent who's refused consent later on. And having said right at the beginning that actually a Gillick competent child can consent, they've got a set of those keys. They can open that door for you. So if their parents are saying, no, I don't want my child to have antibiotics, and the kid's saying, oh, ignore my parents, they're so embarrassing, I'm so sorry, why do they always argue? I want my antibiotics. You can take that consent from the child and you respect their wishes and you carry on. Ideally, obviously, in any case, you want to try and get consensus. You want to think about your long-term professional relationship with that family and the relationship within that family, and you don't want to use a sledgehammer to break that door down. If you can, try and find the person who's got the right set of keys. So that's when the parents are disagreeing. What about when the parents agree with each other but they're disagreeing with us? The law is really, really clear that yes, parents have rights, but those rights only exist right up until the point when the parents stop safeguarding the best interests of that child. And if we as doctors feel that the parents acting as a unit are not acting in the child's best interest, that's when we can jump in. We can challenge those parental wishes. That might be in a medical emergency. It might be in a non-emergency but life-affecting treatment, like starting chemo, or it might be withholding treatment. And we'll look at each of those in turn. So medical emergencies, as I said, I think it's kind of easier. We as doctors have got a duty to act in the best interest of that patient in front of you, and it allows us to give treatment without consent. And actually that's really pragmatic. If you think about a 15-year-old coming in on a school trip with a life-threatening asthma attack, you don't want to be trying to find his next of kin details, get hold of his mum, get her to answer the phone before initiating life-saving treatment. So it's very pragmatic. And I don't know if any of you guys remember this from about this time last year, that poor little lad who was thrown from the balcony at the Tate. You can bet your bottom dollar none of these guys in Hems ran up those stairs and found the mum to ask for consent before treating him. I hasten to add, at no point did those parents refuse consent. It's just an illustration of the point that we can press on without it in a true emergency. Ideally, in an emergency, we want to gain consent, ideally, again, for that therapeutic relationship going forward. But if that consent is refused, you can still go ahead and give the treatment. But there are a couple of things that you should do as well as giving treatment. You should let the hospital legal team know that you're doing it. And you should make you or someone in your team, obviously you can't be doing your life-saving stuff and waiting on hold for children's social services. Someone in your team should make that telephone referral to the duty social worker at social care. Now, top start tip coming up. In life or in a start assessment, anytime you think about phoning social services, say to yourself, I've got to follow up that telephone call within 24 hours with a written referral. Bonus extra points for start. The other extension, obviously, of if a parent is refusing treatment in an emergency, the other potential scenario is that they remove their child from hospital. Now, if you're in a complete medical emergency and that your patient is removed from the hospital, you phone 999, the police go and pick up the child, and under a police protection order, bring them back to the hospital as a place of safety. And that allows you, that police protection order allows you to give your medical life-saving treatment under best interests. It doesn't let you ignore the parents entirely. You still need consent for anything other than the emergency treatment. And always follow up with a written referral. As I've said already, in any non-emergency situation, you can't give treatment without consent. But in the case of those parents who've taken their child out of hospital, they've been brought back in by the police, you've done your emergency stuff, and now you want to treat the chest infection that triggered the acute life-threatening asthma. What do? You can't do that without consent. So going back to the key analogy, the parents have the keys, but they're not going to give them to you. Someone else might have the master copy of the keys. And there are two routes you can go down to get the master copy. You can either talk to children's social care and say, this is a case of neglect. I need you to treat this as a safeguarding case. Or you go to the courts and you get judicial review. They go down two different processes, and one process might be right for one situation and another for another. So for example, the children's social care neglect route is probably the route to take if you've got a child with a chronic condition. So you're in clinic and you're saying to these parents, look, he keeps coming in with his asthma, what's going on? Oh, doctor, we don't believe in asthma, so you know, it's not a thing, doesn't exist, so we don't give him his preventers. Well, actually, that's going to be a problem every single time you see that kid. So you probably don't want to be phoning the court every time he comes in needing his inhalers. So that would be a case to take to children's social care, say this is a case of neglect, can we intervene? Versus someone who needs a one-off emergency operation, you go to court and you say, can we have this one operation? Once this is done, we think things are going to be sorted. In either case, you probably want to get a second opinion, and ideally that should be independent, so separate to your department if you can. If you've gone down the neglect route and social care agree that this refusal constitutes neglect, they then go down the route of organising a care order, and then that gets us back to that nice 2-column table. The local authority have got the child under care, and so the local authority can consent. If you go down the court route, the court will look at what's in the best interests of the child, and they will ask a couple of other medical experts what they think the best thing to do is. Once they get medical consensus, the court usually follow that opinion, and you can carry on treating your patient. So you can go down either of these routes and usually get to the end point that you wanted, but you still have to go down those routes. You have to get that consent from the court or the local authority. Withholding care is a really thorny one, and it's probably particularly relevant if you're doing HEMONC or if you're in PICU. The courts essentially, well, forget the courts, essentially everyone who's looking at it is thinking about what's in the child's best interests. We should really, if possible, get the views of the child. It might not be possible because of age or condition, and try and preempt any emergency scenario. So have a plan in place, agreed with the parents about what happens if the child with the long-term ET tube loses their airway. What are we going to do? And try and preempt that before it becomes an emergency problem. Again, independent second opinions. Tell the parents you're going to do it, and maybe even ask them where they'd like your second opinion to come from. You're trying always to bring them along with you as much as possible. And if you still have a disagreement, it will end up heading to the courts, which is, I suspect, going to become more and more of a problem. And these newspaper articles are just a couple of headlines from some recent cases in the last couple of years. So moving on to confidentiality. Any child who is deemed Gillick competent enough to consent to a treatment should expect the same degree of confidentiality as you and I do when we're patients. That applies to anything, whether it's medical care, surgical care, lifestyle advice, sexual health. If they're Gillick competent, they have the same confidentiality as anyone else does. Obviously, confidentiality is never an absolute right, and it can be breached if not breaching it is going to cause a risk to that child's health, safety, or that of someone else. Children who are not Gillick competent should also assume a degree of confidentiality, but we are allowed to share medical details with a person who's got parental responsibility. But that doesn't mean that your 13-year-old who can't consent for his surgery should have every details of his care discussed with his granny when she happens to come and visit. So just always think, actually, this child has shared information with me. I need to respect that as safely as much as I can while maintaining safety. Which leads obviously onto sex and young people and where it stands on the law. It's quite a grey area, but there are a few black and white absolutes. So again, get your thinking caps on. Age of consent in the UK is what? And does that apply to heterosexual and homosexual relationships, or just one or the other? A child under what age never has legal capacity to consent to any form of sexual activity? And sexual activity with what? is an offence. So the age of consent in the UK is 16, and that is completely black and white. And that applies to heterosexual and homosexual relationships. Having said that, that law is not in place to try and arrest loads and loads of people. And therefore, if you have two patients or a 15-year-old patient who you know is in a mutual relationship with another 15-year-old and they're both consenting to it and you have no concerns about coercion, you're not going to be prosecuting that child or reporting them to the police. But the age of consent is an absolute. What is an absolute, absolute, absolute never, breaking all of those rules about MCQs and never being never the right answer. A child under the age of 13 never has capacity to consent to any sexual activity. And sex without consent is rape. And if that child under 13 cannot consent, then that sexual activity constitutes rape. And sexual activity with a family member or someone living in the home is also an offence, regardless of who that person is, what the age gap is, whether there's been consent. That's also a legal offence. So those are pretty much the three absolutes. Obviously, there's the big grey area of when you have a 14-year-old patient and her 15-year-old boyfriend, or vice versa. And at that point, it's worth thinking about, is this a coercive, unequal relationship? Is there exploitation and all of these things? Which is a really, really tricky one, and obviously has to be handled sensitively. And there are probably a lot of children who are going to deny this, particularly if you ask it bluntly. And actually, if you look at this list of all these sort of symptoms and red flags, actually becoming secretive and disengaged from their family and maybe missing school, I think probably quite a lot of parents of teenagers would say that's fairly standard behaviour. But it's that whole picture, and sort of it's like safeguarding of, if you've got a concern, record it, document it, because you're building up a picture. A tip I had from a previous consultant was actually a good starting question is, oh, how did you and your boyfriend, girlfriend meet? And actually, if they say they met sitting next to each other in geography last year at school, you're probably less worried than if they say, oh, he's a mate of my dad's. We met when I was pouring the drinks at their poker game. So it's quite a gentler opening question. You might not feel you have time to do it at the moment, preparing for START and about to move jobs, but if you have a chance, I'd really recommend the RCPCH online learning about child exploitation. It's not just sexual exploitation, talking about county lines, and they've got some really good accounts from young adults. So saying, I was desperately dropping all these hints. I was crying out for someone to hear that I was really struggling. And they suggest some good ways of approaching it. So I'd really recommend it. It's been a bit of a game changer in my practice. And you get a certificate, so points on the portfolio. In terms of what we as doctors can and can't do for advice or prescriptions for young people and contraceptives, everything we're allowed to do comes from the Fraser guidelines, which is what came out of Mrs. Gillick taking the doctors to court. So Gillick gave her name to the test for competency, and Fraser was the judge, and he came out with some guidelines that apply to contraceptive advice and anything sexual health. And it allows us as doctors to provide medical care, whether that's advice or prescriptions, to a young person without that child's parents knowing, if we can satisfy that that young person is Gillick competent and that the treatment and care or advice is in their best interests. So I'd highly advocate documenting why you've made those decisions, why we feel that person is competent and why it's in their best interests, and that you've encouraged them to talk to their parents. But if they say, no, I'm not going to tell my mum, we can't do that without consent. Unless, of course, going back to is it putting someone else at risk? Right, briefly, really briefly, talking about death. We as doctors, unfortunately as paediatricians, it's not something we have to do often, but that makes it even harder when we do have to do it. One of our jobs is to complete the medical cause, the medical certificate of cause of death, which by definition means we need to be able to put on paper why someone has died. So if you don't know why they've died, you have to refer it to the coroner. You also have to talk to the coroner if it's accident, suicide, violence or neglect, or during or after surgery, or after police custody. The death process is going under a big overhaul at the moment, so I'm not going to go into more details, but have a look on your intranet where you work about the child death process. My time has just gone off telling me we've got 3 minutes left. My top tip to prepare for START from the ethics point of view is read this document. I know I sent it about 1 million years and had to dig it out to prepare for START, but it's obviously now online. It's a fairly straightforward, easy read, and I particularly recommend reading the chapter on consent and making decisions. The BMA have got some good advice about the death process. And with any ethical or legal dilemma, know your limits and know how you ask for help. And the people to ask for help, there is always someone more senior than you somewhere, not necessarily holding an apple and looking quite so white-haired, but they are there somewhere. Your legal department in the hospital or your indemnity company, or indeed Sveta here representing your safeguarding team. They will have covered this 1 million times before. So this is just an example, the scenario I had in my start. It's obviously a PEM heavy station because I'm PEM grid, but child brought into major trauma centre, stabbed 3 times, medically actually now treated and fit for discharge, but one of your team has spoken to child safeguarding, as they should have done, and you haven't yet heard back from them. The nurse in charge comes to tell you that the patient wants to leave. Your registrar is trying to phone his parents. I assumed they meant the patient's parents rather than the registrar's parents. But the patient is saying, no, you can't talk to me. I'm not talking to you about it. I just need to leave and you can't talk to my parents. How do you handle that case? Now, I don't think we've got time to go through that, but just have a think about that or your speciality's equivalent based on what we've talked about. My tips for START in general, if in doubt, talk and think like a consultant. Think as though this is your first month of being a new consultant. You won't have come across everything. You won't have done everything before. Apparently there's nothing magic about CCT. You don't instantly know how to do everything, which is disappointing. So if in doubt, talk to any of your clinical lead. If it's a sort of trainee in difficulty scenario, your college tutor will have seen everything before and will know the resources you can use. Name doctor for safeguarding, subspeciality consultants, bed manager, nurse in charge, whatever. These are all tools that you could have in your toolbox to wheel out during START. And just approach it as a series, admittedly a timed series, of case-based discussions. When you have a CBD with a consultant, it's about your patient, you know your stuff, and you're using it essentially as a way of showing off your knowledge. And approach START like that, and you'll be absolutely fine. Any questions on the little chat function?
Been following it and I couldn't see any, my lovely. I don't think so.
Perfect.
Anyone before we say goodbye to lovely Emily? I don't think so.
Perfect.
Everyone's just holding on in there.
They're hanging in there. Well, you're saving the best. You're saving the best for last. I'm going to hang fire and listen to Sveta.
You've just someone's typing. Someone's saying sorry, just typing.
Someone's just typing.
Just typing. But someone said excellent talk. Thanks. And
thank you very much.
There you go.
And while someone is typing, I had on my very, very first slide, I sit as the vice chair on a research ethics committee. I'm not plugging it, but if anyone is ever interested in finding out what happens on a research ethics committee, you're always very welcome to drop me a line and come and observe and see what happens.
There is a question. Can you put the question you got into Start again, please?
Of course. There we go. And I suppose they could make that a bit less trauma-y and make it a bit more medical and make it more of a general PEDS question.
Yeah.
But actually it was an example, A, to talk about confidentiality and consent, but also to slightly show off what I knew we did in real life. You know, and I said, well, actually in my department, we've got a youth worker. Actually, maybe a 15-year-old boy does not want to talk to a 37-year-old woman. Actually, maybe my slightly younger male registrar is best placed to do that. My male nurse in charge, the youth worker, you know, and you just kind of, you've got all of your team in your head, what you do in your local hospital, sort of wheel them out.
Emily, you've got a question.
What's that?
Sex between 16 and just above 18-year-old, i.e. minor, major, it's an offence, isn't it? Or does it have to be someone in a position of trust?
So if someone's 16, they're legally allowed to have sex. If they're having sex with someone over 18, it slightly depends how over 18. And that's why there's that massive grey area. The minute they hit 18, it doesn't automatically become an offence, no. If that person over 18 is a teacher, a priest, a doctor, then yes, it is. If it's their older brother's best mate, no. And that's when you're going to need to go into the grey area of exploring the nature of that relationship and things like that.
And it's a good time, as you say, to work out exploitation. So I, for example, had a 16-year-old in ED when I was on a night shift who I'm absolutely 100% convinced was trafficked.
Oh.
And so that became even though she was legally allowed to consent, you have to think about, I suppose it's about risk, isn't it? And about safeguarding, which Sweta's going to talk about. And that's where it becomes dodgy, Emily, dodgy,
all very dodgy. And it always happens on a night shift. It's the one certainty.
And that was the one time, I got the police there and they did an emergency protection order and we got the Metropolitan Safeguarding team in and it all happened because they agreed with me.
Oh, wow. Well, I hope you got your safeguarding CBD out of the scenario.
I got a few CBDs, don't worry. Shouldn't laugh, that's not a nice case. Right, so on that jolly note, you've got lots of lovely feedback saying how wonderful and succinct it was. So thank you very much. I could always listen to you forever, but now because it is 10 to 9, Sweta's got the last talk. Sweta, who is a consultant at Newham, and she does all the looked after children over in Newham, which is not an easy gig, I think it's fair to say. So she's an amazing person. She's also, I consider, a good friend of mine. So I think you're all very lucky to have her talk.
Thanks.
So I will shut up now.
Yeah, so thanks. So as Najat kindly introduced me, I'm a consultant in the East London Foundation Trust in Newham, which is an extremely deprived part of London. And for those of you who've worked there will know that there's a lot of safeguarding in Newham. So I could therefore talk forever about safeguarding, but I realise it is close to 9 o'clock and people do want to get on with their evening. So I'm going to keep it start focused, just go through a couple of cases and then direct you towards things that you should be looking at, things that you might get questions on. So I'm not going to go into lots of detail because we could be here all night. And so I've only, I'm still a baby consultant. I became a consultant in March. And as Emily rightly said, you're not going to know everything. You need to have a framework with how to approach it and know who to ask, just as you would when you were doing your, MRC PCH exams. So this is not an exam. This is not an exam. So, and so I did Start 18 months ago, and I think the thing that I took home is there's safeguarding in all of it. So every station, just think, yeah, I mean, we should be thinking it all the time as pediatricians, and I think it's the same for START. At every station, oh, there could be some safeguarding. Just say it. If you think it, just say it, and it probably is something that's relevant for that station. So this is something I use with the transition. I used a couple of years ago in the transition to leadership course. I was thinking about how to describe what we do as pediatricians in child protection, and thinking about all the different roles that we have. And it helped me then to think about, if I'm in a scenario, what do I need to do here? What is my responsibility? So there's sort of 3 areas we're involved. You know, our bread and butter is doing the medical assessments. We're in A&E, we're in the community. And what we really need to be able to do is recognize a vulnerable child, and that's so important. So I'm sure all of you can do that now at this stage of your training. And the other bit that we might be asked to do, and you might be doing in START, is giving advice to other specialties. So others within health, but also social care and police. And this is the multidisciplinary working. This is a bit probably we have less experience of, unless you've done lots of community, or you're a community trainee, is going to all the strategy meetings and the case conferences and writing reports. I highly recommend the college courses on report writing and court skills. I mean, not all of us at some stage are probably going to have to do something like this, even if it's only once. And I think it's a good way of scaring you silly and also making you very prepared. They're very good courses. But what it boils down to for me, and I should do for you, is, thinking, is this young person, is this child safe? Do they have any unmet health needs? And are you escalating? Are you sharing your concerns? It's all about safeguarding. Is all about communication. So these are the big points that I think I would, they would be wanting you to be thinking about. And safety, patient safety, it's all, again, like safeguarding, the first thing you should be thinking about in each of these stations is patient safety. I had a little framework that worked for me with START, in which I just had a mantra in my head, which was started off with: safety, is the child safe? What's going on with my team? Who do I need to talk to? What guideline do I need to follow? And then how am I going to follow this up? Am I going to do a QI project, or do a bit of teaching, or what am I going to do next? So take it to the next level. Okay, so this is the case. Let me just get the chat box open. I'd like for you to have a think. I'm going to talk, this is amalgam of a couple of cases that I've seen. This is just to put everything rubbish that can happen in a case, just so you can think about what to prioritize and what to think, where your role will be. So your GP is referred to A&E, and they're pitched up at 9 o'clock on a Friday, which is always when these complex cases come. It's next week, and or 2 weeks time, everyone's changed over. The new SD4 is seeing this young person in A&E. It's a 2.5-year-old girl who's come with mum, got loads of bruises on her back and on her bottom. And mum says, I didn't see it before because it was in the care of dad, but actually that was 2 nights ago. She sat on these bruises for 2 nights and then thought, oh, and has come into A&E. She seems a little bit drunk. And she's also got another little one, under 1, who's at home, apparently with the grandmother. Gosh. So the registrar has done a history and examination. She's described these bruises to you over the phone. She said a bit about the background, that the family are going through a divorce and there's been DV in the past. But they're not known to social care, it hasn't been raised to that level, and there's no other health concerns. So if you just take I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, let me time this, to think about the following questions. So when I did this last time, I had you all in groups, and I think it's too complicated to put 93 people into breakout rooms. So if you have a little think, so what further information do you need? You're sitting at home thinking, what, Do I go in? Do I not? What do you ask the registrar to do next? And what will you do next? So I'll give you a couple of minutes and then I'll open it up for you guys to answer. I feel like I should have some music or something. I'll put it back on the case so you can see. Okay, it's not 2 minutes up yet, but there's lots of comments. Okay, so full history, yes. So the registrar's already done the full history and the injuries that they've seen are the ones that they've shown. Is the child medically well, right? Yeah. So she's otherwise well. Who has PR? Yep, following on from Emily, that's important. The grandmother's name, what was the main reason to come to A&E was the bruises. So the GP had referred because it's presented the GP first. So Sarah Bennett, that's right. Want to ensure both the child on the ward safe and supervised, and to bring in the other child. Need to contact social care, it's very worrying. Yeah. So if we think about a framework, so first about safety. So well done for those of you who are mentioning safety. So is this child in a safe place? So yes, at the moment, because they've come into hospital, they're with you, and you're right to think about the other baby at home. We don't know where they are really. Are they with the grandmother or not? So it's really important to get that child also seen and brought. Yeah, are there other causes of bruising? Is the child otherwise unwell? So yeah, thinking about medical causes as well as safeguarding is really important. Yeah, we don't know much about dad. Someone's going to have to talk to dad. It's probably not going to be your role, but probably to, unless they come in, but you need to refer to social care and escalate this. There's lots of risk factors here, safeguarding things. You're not going to send this child home. Lots and lots of warning signs. And yeah, so as the consultant, probably you need to go in and help. So it's 9 o'clock on a Friday. There's not many people around. This is a really complicated case. I mean, if it's a very competent registrar, she sorted everything out, the mum's compliant, they come in and social care involved, you may not need to go in, but it's going to be a discussion. I would personally go in, but if you feel that there's other support around, it's not busy, whatever, there may be a case to stay at home, but I would personally go in because this sounds like a really complicated case that needs a consultant to review the injuries. Are there other investigations you would do? Yeah. So yeah, blood tests. What do you want to know from your blood tests? Yeah. You use child protection colonial. That's great. It's now online, I think. So that's brilliant. Extended clotting with chain of evidence. Brilliant. So I think, so it's a good question about whether you bring the 8-month-old in automatically. So it would be a discussion. So you're never making, I think what's really important in safeguarding, you're not ever making these decisions on your own. You're always making it as part of the wider multi-agency team. So you will certainly be calling your social care colleagues. You'll be on the phone to the duty social care and saying, we don't know where this 8-month-old is. We think this 8-month-old will need to come in. So either social care, or if you're very worried, the police would be going into that family home and finding them. So yeah, we have to think about skeletal survey on the younger one, but certainly on the older one, and a slightly older child, it might be a selected series. It might not be a full skeletal survey, but if it's such extensive bruising, you would be quite worried there's some underlying injury. Okay, so where am I? What did I say? So yeah, is the child safe? Are there any unmet health needs? And have you communicated the concern? So I think we've covered all of those areas. So your admission for a place of safety, you know it's unlikely to be accidental, you're referring to social care and possibly the police. So remember there are other people in the hospital that can be helpful, that can give you advice, perhaps maybe not at, you could call them at 9 o'clock at night, or when you've got more information you can discuss. If you know that the child's in a safe place, you could chat to the named doctor. And then think about going to the hospital, how competent is the child. As we said, probably would be a good idea. New registrar, first week of the job, you probably want to go and support them. And then, so the added bonus points for, as Emily put it, for START would be thinking where you then take the case. Like, so are your systems okay, you know, for dealing with a child who comes in with safeguarding concerns at 9 o'clock? Did everything work out okay? What could have been done better next time? Are you going to bring this to a peer review discussion? Are you going to bring it to an education session? Are you going to think about how this trainee is feeling about the case and how you're going to support them? So thinking outside the box. Sarah Walker, oh, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, so as I'd mentioned, you know, talking to the police and social care and bringing them to a safe place. Okay, so what happens if the ST4, before you get in there, calls in a panic? Mum's packed her things and she's decided to leave the ward. What can you do then? Yeah, call security, call the police. Yeah, so this is huge risk. You're very so Osama, you've mentioned that she has PR. Yeah, but I think in this case she's putting the child at risk. This child is we believe that, well, you think the injuries are severe enough that this child needs observation. So I think you would want to try and negotiate with the mother and try and calm her down and think about how to keep her in on her own terms. But if she does leave, you will have to call social care and the police and bring the child back. Yeah. Thank you to Sarah and Emily. Okay, so just, I think for start, just be aware so you're not flummoxed with the terminology if it comes up in discussion, but you should know the terms here, and I think be aware of the Children's Act and be familiar of the main parts of it, and know that what a Section 47 investigation is, which is when there is concerns around significant harm to a child, and there is an investigation either jointly with social care and the police or by social care on their own into the nature of that, those concerns. The Section 17, so actually I think it goes, I split it up, but and the emergency protection orders, police protection orders, which Emily's talked about. So I'm just going to move on to here. So apply to Children's Act applying to all children under 18. So be aware of the sort of procedures. So if you think, for example, this child that you've seen in A&E there will need to be a strategy meeting, usually within 24 hours of there being a notification to social care and a decision being made. And so that the health, social care and police should be invited to that, and that's where you make a decision of how the progress with the investigation, you know, whether the child needs to go to a place of safety. There are other measures that we have if, you know, if you're worried about a child who's been neglected, you're thinking about, Emily mentioned a case where there's having a chronic condition that isn't well managed. If you're trying to build information about the child and the family to get a referral to social care, you might think about a team around the child or a professionals meeting. And usually a child protection conference, if you haven't been to one, it's a good idea to attend one, to see how they work. You probably have done them in community, if not for some children in hospital, and understanding things like the signs of safety that they use, and they use that parents are usually present, and they usually occur within 15 days. So that if yes, they may have it over the weekend with the duty officers, a strategy meeting. They probably would, particularly if they're significantly concerned. But if the child's in a safe place, they might do it till Monday. Depends on the case. Oh. So I think Emily's already talked about police protection powers and emergency protection. So police protection, they can remove a child from their carers for up to 72 hours. And the parental responsibility remains with the parents, as Emily had already mentioned. And then there's also the EPO, which social care apply for through court, and they can do that through emergency court. And that would give powers that last 8 days. And then the parental responsibility is shared between parents and social care. And then remember, looked after children, which is my area. So there are two legal, I guess, parts of the Act that will formally makes a child looked after. That could be a Section 20. And PR will remain with parents. So that's really important when you're doing looked after children assessments, for those doing community grid, making sure you have consent from the right person with PR. And then Section 31, which is your care orders, that's where the PR is shared again with the local authority and the parents. Sasha, as processes may vary regionally, is it okay to mention what's relevant to your region? So these should be national processes in terms of the sections and the investigations, but you may want to talk about, there may be local guidelines in terms of how you manage a child. I guess I wonder what processes vary in your region, Sasha. If you could elaborate, then it might be. But these processes are fairly standardized because they're following the Children's Act. So Section 17 is for a child in need. Sorry, the chat box is on my slide. So this is those children, young people that don't meet the threshold for child protection, a Section 47 investigation, but there is enough concern for there to be more involvement with social care. And so you know that they need more support. For example, there could be children with special needs, with parents not being able to manage, or children with neglect, have been neglected. So I hope you all know that the majority of children and young people who are either child in need or child protection, they are therefore concerns around neglect. Okay, so let's do another case. I'm aware that the time's going quick. So this is something that you might not see as much in A&E, but again, it's something complex that it's important that you know what the processes are. So Sarah is a 15-year-old girl, and so it presents to A&E after school. She's seen by a male registrar who calls you for advice. So this male registrar's been to see this young lady and on his own and examined her and come out. So the young person has disclosed that yesterday she was raped by someone She knew. She doesn't reveal the perpetrator's identity. She appears in distress, is really tearful. She doesn't attend with a parent and doesn't want the parents to know. And there's nothing else, medical history, nothing else in the background of note. So again, just a minute to think about what further information do you need? What do you advise the A&E SPR to do next? And what will you do next? Yeah, so these are all good points. And so just good to go quickly to Sasha's point about terminology. Yes, sorry, I hadn't realized there were people here from Scotland because on the call. So yes, if it's different, definitely you need to use your local terminology and processes. So there are a number of issues in this case. So Nadia, you're right. Make sure the child is safe first. So is she in a safe place now? Yes. Is also, has she got any medical concerns? So is she bleeding? Has she got any physical injuries following the rape? Is there anything medically that you need to do first? And yes, you can examine externally, you know, if you think there's an injury, there's something that needs to be fixed immediately, then yes, you should be doing that first. Depending on where you are, so those based in London, so I've mentioned the Haven, so this is a sexual assault referral centre. So other parts of the country, it's known as a SARC. I have no idea what it's called in Scotland, I'm afraid. So you want to encourage this young person to get have further examination, forensic examination, if possible, and you should be alerting social care and the police. So, so regarding her not telling you who it is, if she doesn't want to at the moment, that's fine, but perhaps she could, you can, that would be social care and the police may talk to her about it. Archway in Glasgow. Okay, thank you. That must be the SARC in Glasgow. Medical stuff sorted, yes. If she is competent, you wouldn't inform the parents, that's correct, but you would probably have a conversation with her to explain that she's going to need support through this process and how you're going to support her through this process. So I think we would be encouraging her. And if we thought that there was a risk to her, a continued risk or some, again, you need to think about when we would break that confidentiality where we need to support her. So it depends on who the perpetrator, if they're in the family home, we need to get more information. So let me go. So what have I said? Yeah, so these are all, I think you've all made the relevant points. So is she safe? So what can you do there when she's in A&E? Is she medically safe? Is she bleeding? Is there something we need to do? The other piece is, doing a bit of who can be with you here? Where will you go home to? Letting her know that because she's under 16, this is going to need reporting and further. Yeah, you would think about giving emergency contraception. So that could all be done in the SARC as well. And so she can't decline a referral because she's under 16 to Haven and the police. It will have to be notified. And there will be a strategy meeting and she'll probably need to do, she could decline further investigation of it. For example, doing, like saying who it is or having a physical examination, but it would be reported. So then there's the other piece about this A&E registrar. So don't focus, this is what happens in START. You'll get these scenarios and there'll be something else in there. So this is, we focus on the safeguarding because this is safeguarding talk. But don't forget, what is this male registrar doing? Going in on his own to this vulnerable young person. So you would have to think, is this a trainee in difficulty? Is this a trainee that needs educating about sexual assault or examining young girls? Is she new? Is this a cocky registrar thinks he can do everything, or is this a vulnerable young registrar who doesn't know the process and has made an honest mistake? So you need to talk to the trainee, just think about why he did what he did, explain why it is inappropriate, and think about how he could do it better next time, and think about informing his supervisor just to give him continuing support. So this is a A&E SPR, and perhaps you're the paediatric consultant. Sorry to clarify, can we not? So it's tricky. You need to really think about how competent, if this young person is competent and understands the consequences, where is the risk, where is the danger, and work with the young person to inform the parents. I think in most cases you can speak with the young person and encourage them to disclose to their parents, knowing that they're well supported. In most cases, I don't know, Najat, you've done a lot of CSA work as well, so perhaps what's your experience? I know we've just had a discussion about this in the past.
I'm so sorry, I zoned out.
Don't worry. 15-year-old who's been sexually assaulted who doesn't want to tell her parents. You can.
Okay, I think you've got to. This is where your communication skills come in paediatrics, big time. I think you've got to massively encourage her to disclose, but I think you've got to do it in a really sensitive way. And I think you have to be quite careful what the family setup is actually, because if you feel like it's going to do her harm by disclosing, and that might be mental health, etc., then you're going to have to give her time. So we have had instances where 15-year-olds haven't disclosed, and the way we've got around it is a lot of talking and a lot of reassurance and a lot of sorting out the family unit a little bit. And sometimes it's that you disclose over a few days and it's not something you do. But I think you've got to, with a 15, it's really tricky because it's that age of consent, but I think you've got to take it on board that they don't want their parents to know, and you actively encourage that they should probably know. And you work really closely with a young person. That kind of person is normally an inpatient or somewhere safe, in a place of safety. I think where it gets dodgy is if they're going home to that place and they don't know, because then you're not empowering that parent to know about risk, and what that risk is harm to themselves if they do something overnight, i.e. kill themselves or self-harm. So it's a really tricky risk decision, that. And sometimes you admit them to a place of safety, be it a hospital. Sometimes you have to ask why they're not wanting to disclose, and that's where paediatrics, I think we're quite good at honing in and working out holistically what's going on. That's just my opinion.
Thanks, Najat. I hope that answers your question as well, Emmy. So it's going to be a case by case, working with the rest of the team, working with social care. Might not happen straight away, may have to do it over time. And if you admit them, you can, again, you could say that she's got an injury or something. You can make up something that works for the family, or her mental health, probably, and that she needs support. I think it's going to be a case by case. It's not a generic thing. You just work with others in your team, think about the family, work with a young person to get a plan. Okay, we're really running out of time. So we've talked about that. So just other scenarios, because safeguarding is a huge piece. The SPR needed support because he's a male SPR that's gone into a female who's been assaulted on his own to do the examination. So does that help, Lambry? So other things to think about, so neglect, thinking about neglect in complex cases. So you may get this chronic patient and you're thinking all about the medical condition in your start, because that's the main part, but also think, is there safeguarding here? Is there neglect? Thinking about perplexing presentation and FII. So again, these might be complex cases that come up in START, and it's just about thinking that it could be a possibility. Then lots of different children with a disability, again, thinking about safeguarding. How do you communicate with them? Where do you take them? So we had a young person today referred with autism, who's been witnessed punched in the face by his dad, and he's punching everyone. So how do we do that safely? How do we, and what do we gain by seeing that young person? So it was quite a challenging thing to think about for me today. Remember, looked after children. I know lots of you may not come across looked after children in your day-to-day. Thinking about how they might present to you with behavioural problems or attachment issues. Emily's mentioned about CSE, don't forget FGM, and then CDOP and child death. I don't know if anyone's gone through those processes, but you might get asked about what happens after a child dies, and thinking about safeguarding them. So these are the resources. So I think the Child Protection Companion now is all online. The other good place to get information, I think someone mentioned earlier, is the child protection evidence. So thinking about when to do skeletal surveys, for example, or dental examinations. There's lots of brilliant resource there, which is all evidence-based for you to look at. Other places are the Paediatrics Care Online has got the Children's Act on it, and you can read it. Working Together, sorry. And then there's a document which has all about what competencies you should have for level 3. And the NSPCC website, I think I've covered all of those. And then I've put some websites here thinking about other things in safeguarding: poverty, social media, youth work, youth violence. That's the link there for CDOP and the child protection evidence. Oops. I think these slides get shared on the Trello. So really my take home is, when you get coming to these scenarios, is again, is the child safe? Are there any unmet health needs? And have you communicated? Have you escalated to others? And then the extra bonus points are, is there also something else going on in this case? So is there also something medical going on? Is there also a trainee in difficulty? Is there also some opportunity to do an audit or a QI or something else? Is there a guideline I should be following? Just, it's ridiculous, but you do end up doing that as a consultant, thinking, you know, have I done everything? Is there anything else I need to do? Thank you for listening. Do you have any questions? I think people have asked during the course of events.
Fab. Thanks, lovely. I think people have. I think you've had a lot of chat, actually. It's been really interactive. Well done. So there are now 83 people, now 82, it's all going, everyone's leaving. Please fill in the feedback. I think I've posted it about 1 million times now. You're all going to get bored of that link. And I will be putting this up on the YouTube channel, should you want to go through some stuff again. And as Sveta's already said, we're going to put everything on the Trello board. A lot of the resources, particularly one that Emily signposted to the GMC, is already on the Trello board. So there's a big ethics section on it, and everyone I've added today should be able to see that. So I think we'll stop recording that and say bye-bye to everybody. So thanks for joining, and yeah, please fill in the feedback. That'd be super useful.